people still call you
Yes,
that?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm referring to it now. I've been called Pap Daddy and
Oh, yeah.
Papa Pappas. The list goes on.
Those are all badass nicknames.
Pap Daddy. Pap Daddy's definitely the word.
That's great.
Is everyone here that we need? Patrick here?
We're missing
It's back
Burton.
But Patty is
And-
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, ours too.
Patrick here. What's up, Paul?
Sup, girl?
I really hope Michigan doesn't plan out that.
I'm gonna be playing 2048 all the
Huh?
day. So
You're gonna be at 24 is what you said.
no, I'm playing 2048. So
Pardon?
Did you grab Lloyd's stuff that you were sending?
Yep. I'll try to show you.
Does everyone call him Wood? Oh, okay.
Or like a few people. But
All of a sudden I saw him in the hallway and we're just shocked that he was here.
you want to come down?
he's a specter that haunts the NDT.
You would want to give him shit for carrying around a keyboard. That's kind of a harder move for someone who's not
I mean, it
debating.
makes him cut cards out or type faster.
For someone who's not debating and who's
Whatever works.
yeah, that's fair.
I think we're gonna want to see what yours is. Who sent it out?
No, I'm waiting on PK to get here.
He's
Right
right
there.
there.
Oh shit! I'm really just gonna sit.
I was like, what is Ellis waiting for like 5 minutes?
Just meditating, you know. All right, I sent it. Jesus. Last round of the day, you know.
It's like 6 o'clock.
2:30 feeling.
It's only 3 hours from my bedtime.
All right, let me know when you've got it.
Miles does not, but I have it.
Cool. Yep. All right. Advantage
Page 1 is hegemony, Brooks 13. Deep engagement gives leverage to restrained parties from market production alliance agreements to states from expansion, mirror, shimmer, forecast, multiple region, real with competition, narrow space, great power, Europe, Israel, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia take action to the U.S. retrenchment with intensify security limits, which could soak a destabilizing reaction from China. Optimism about what would happen if the U.S. retrenches dependent on its restrictive assumption about state practices, burgeoning research, growth, and social and other sciences undermines the started states have preferences for status, even states that are relatively secure may engage in non-competitive behavior. Withdrawal will yield instability, great power war weekend. Let's see proxy wars like United States, Egypt, Jordan, Japan, Taiwan, and Saudi Arabia might create nuclear force. The debate over the instability prolific changes that the numbers goes up, the risk of accidents goes up, crisis dynamics gets been out of control. The U.S. would play a key role in countering China. The argument that U.S. security commitments are unnecessary is countered by a lot of scholarship. The U.S. led security competition for preventing a hothouse environment for military capabilities. We control uniqueness, hard powers, the reason for balance decline, to address their fire wars under cycle decline, records accepted the significant global trends. By conflicts peaked in 91, extended intensity of competence less than half of what it was. The biggest reason is the global hegemon called the U.S. The hegemony were to fade independence, peacekeeping and democracy would be out the window. U.S. power connects powerful constraint and rivals if against some. Every conflict can blunt a lot of them. Supremacy prevents middle rank chase from challenging in a war prospect. The intervention would be dangerous. Legal ambiguity over private contractor status hampers military effectiveness. Minnow 5. Abu did expose problems with command structure, discipline, predictability, one personnel, include private employees. You observe the loss of private control produced by confusion, lines of authority, confusion about precisely these legal questions can lead to discovered actual lapse on military. Effectiveness will may relieve the military developing capacities internally to the long-term detriment of strength contracts. Can leave the military vulnerable at crucial moments. The military may compromise its strength by relying on the people who would never use directly or individuals who would shift the loyalties. Codification is key to effective use of force in future conflicts. C for 13. In Iraq and Afghanistan, use BFC to massively kill every state before limits of what they can be allowed to do matter for. Wars to come, the U.S. becomes irresistibly drawn to Yemen, Pakistan, Syria, Mexico, or other great harvest will occur in future wars. The U.S. will lose out of industries and bureaucratic interests, effectively codify the wrong lessons. Hopefully, Congress can draw the right lesson. Spills over globally and undermines support for hedge Chapman 10. Citizens voted the military fall into a legal loophole. Military action can should hold them accountable. PMCs dress like soldiers, bear arms like soldiers, and fill social rules uses. Reaching unprecedented level of bloody Sunday provides a prime example of how contracts may undermine the U.S. military's effectiveness worldwide. A large contract force without adequate oversight is dangerous to win local support coin. And Iraq came to a grinding halt immediately after Nisor Square pay. PMCs must be held accountable not merely to provide personal justice, but also to support the citizens domestic and abroad. Independently, PMFs undermine allies. Congress key Michael's war privatization made was considerable consequences for foreign policy credibility and contempt attaining the level of profiteering around the world. Characters validate the perception the American interest driven by dollars rather than ideals rather than the force of Congress. Also invites concern the U.S. as not subject to legal constraint allies when the private cavalry is suspecting that other crises outside of core interests. This suspicion can breed resentment and weakening ties. Advantage 2 is monopoly. PMFs are eroding the global monopoly on state use of force. Legal regulations are key. Crom 13. Based on empirical evidence, the article concludes the U.S. is leading the transformation of the normal state monopoly on violence, so this has now been formally implemented. It's allowed a growing number of industry countries to legalize force by PMSCs. The potential consequences are serious and widespread acceptance would allow the legal gray zone in which conflicts may be filled by profit of PMSCs. These scenarios may seem probable, but just with widespread acceptance of the norm of the state monopoly. However, the norm is changing implemented on PMSCs. Like Will's for acceptance of legal regulations to just transformation of the norm of the state monopoly spills over. U.S. norms are key to solving this calc and a breakdown of institutions. Stanger and Williams 6, given U.S. global influence, profit has any significant implication. Democratic governance bears on international stability, deliberation, transparency, reassure states, even on democratic ones that actions can be anticipated that any abrupt change will be single because states-based calculations from such signal deal less transparency, the more likely miscalculate produce conflict with the U.S. to pursue PMCs. The fewer instead of Washington has to get told her to make compromises needed to maintain coalitions. It surely makes a difference for diplomacy whether corporations are the primary representatives of the most powerful state that will stop the strength of the international order as the principal consumer and producer of private military. The U.S. shapes the norms of the whole frame interstate competition. Extinction, Vancouver of 99. The report exacerbated the fact that the state never established a monopoly on violence and developed companies. The impact will be adverse. The future of as many conflicts in store, resorting to chemical, bio-nuclear weapons, World War III, a large-scale clash between superpowers does take place. New weapons are used to result only the Estonians. There is probably no future. Many will find it easier to translate advantages and direct power instead of merely allowing the truth of the state will be less fortunate consequences, diminished security and turmoil. Organizations or less accountable organizations may not be able to keep up the peace. Authority will collapse and violence will break out. Reversion to more primitive ways of less than 2. Maintaining monopoly on use of force restrains global balance. Bassias 11. The absence of accountability represents a huge challenge for peaceful environment. Reliance may consider coalitions the best option to prevent interstate balances through democratic regimes. Such regimes are able to build agreements that promote transparency with the states lose monopoly. Of course, it means that assumption becomes irrelevant when state forces are not balanced. If the state there are no restraints, the increasing presence undermines the world of monopoly, hindering the possibility to strengthen international coalitions. External restraints solidify the key to restrain balance and maintain effective diplomacy. Kronig and Stram 14. We draw on a large IR literature that agrees that states with fewer constraints on the executive more likely to use force by the institutional system and decision-making process shape of the property extending constraints. Stymie the word constraints can contribute to successful diplomacy through signaling made possible by the domestic audience. Cost when constraint issues, the leaders issue threats. They are inherently more credible. The striking absence of war among democracies due to greater constraints on executive power. Statutory restraints demonstrate compliance. The alternative is a legal vacuum. Camp 10. Effective legislation is necessary. Major and the UCMJ are available, but the statutes lack clarity of law. By contending clear language and civil closing accountability after decades, there has been no legislative gap. Congress should pass a new legislation given the legal vacuum. It is strategically important to demonstrate the complaints are being taken seriously. Demonstrating the U.S. takes allegations seriously would a repair reprobate, particularly among groups who support its critical success in the future and current conflicts. Keeping PMCs outside the legal framework framework undermines our RAC relations, Brickleton, expanding civil liability for PMCs, international compliance, bringing PMCs within the U.S. legal framework can provide countries with greater confidence in the American system and may allow the U.S. to execute its mission more effectively. A high standard like the UCMJ makes sense. Unlawful and cities can be detrimental to U.S. image and to our RAC relations. The insurgency may be decreased if less population knows there's a clear backup that way. Our RAC relations and democratic signaling contain Middle East war and oil shocks. Dorel 14. When troops out there were sending the power of the world's only Arab democracy, population once viewed by the U.S. Iraqi lenses now watching surge British Iraqis are threatened to get by civil war of resistance to an authoritarian government in Iraq. Have a representing bank the battle and conflict in the Middle East. Allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia being incorporating the possibility of a major war with oil sharks in the U.S. and enriched Iraqis. It allows both victories that the U.S. will continue to support relationship as well as press leaders to work together. The U.S. did not apply enough pressure to promoting democracy. Anticipated there was less thought to how to manage the health of Iraqi democracy. Oil shocks go nuclear. Henderson 70 ceasefire and oil precipitated by Middle East instability again. Lead to economic dislocation, damaging the global economy. Such a shock could mean war with Russia and China. The world is closer to nuclear war than since the Cuban Missile Crisis with talk of preemptive nuclear attack. Middle East war escalates. Russell 9 perception that its windows closing get prompted preventive attack. Iran's response can involve escalation, lack of communications to build cooperation. To this, that escalation could happen as a result of by miscalculation or by the pressures of war conflict. Would quickly escalate regional attack. This would UCB. The asymmetry suggesting increasing the probability of war such an outcome will be a risk for the entire world. Contention 3 is solvency. This card is long, but the plan solves, and only we solve the block at 12. The best hope is an express legislative demarcation. Congress can overcome the challenges by developing an explicit statutory framework. Binding legislation would end future outsourcing and being concerned the PSCs was ready and undesired field setting up changeable statutory boundaries that must symbolize this compliance. Legislative action is preferable to ad hoc executive implementation, while about this manifesto policy goal to reduce PSCs. A binding legislative determination would preclude future presidents from twisting the rules. Guidance on IGFs is not far-fetched. Congress is already in the de facto position to shut down NDTs as he functions by leveraging its power to control the purse. Congress can stall a contract by refusing to appropriate. Congress can make a statement through legislation. The goal is to establish a formal regime across congressional approval. DoD is outsourced. Functions that Congress believes are inherently governmental, requiring DoD to justify the outsourcing case by case under the scrutiny of Congress, legitimizes the process and gives substance to IGF. The question remains how to eliminate misconduct without sacrificing the advantages that does not wholly undermine PSC. Systematic statutory rules are necessary. By adopting binding legislation gives teeth to restrictions. Congress allows the ultimate discretion while allowing flexibility. Congress can place it against constraints without completely sacrificing mobility and expertise. Restoring essential duties that best for America's image. Incorporation into the chain of command is key to viable norms. Morgan 8. Without the norm of incorporation, the ability to use international tribunals has decreased. The lack of a norm in incorporation will necessitate and implied culpability. The window in which the U.S. can establish international norms with TMFs can be short of existing arbitrary regime is unworkable. The U.S. can use its influence to any international agreement codifying the norm of state responsibility has benefits. The treaties can define the common point of reference. The U.S. can use its dominant market position to establish norms of PMFs. A voluntary coalition can encourage possible agreements which can give guidance to the terms and norms have achieved the status of customary law. Plain text. Why not do it here? The United States federal government should restrict by statute introduction of its military combatant company armed forces into hostilities outside the military chain of command. Back to Advantage 2. Congressional incorporation is key to interoperability. Eisenberg 9. Reliance on contractors to evade public acceptance of the question is whether force should be used by military personnel. Private contractors often neglected. The U.S. relies more heavily upon contractors to reinforce the tendency to crisis and unilateral and are ensuring that burdens will be carried disproportionately by the U.S. Other states have not kept up with their force. They're not easily interoperable with American personnel or equipment. That because Congress has less control, the White House and the Pentagon can evade the opposition. PMC remains outside the chain of command. Coordination is needed. That solves war with China. 9-12. China started comes to the east and South China Sea, embrace their dramatic increase. The operational sample of the PLA reveal basic extension to a certain influence. A2AG requires greater interoperability. Peace and stability in the sea are vital allies require interoperable capabilities and operations. Amidst the looming budget cuts and fiscal austerity, a smarter usage is essential. The primary manifestation of smarter resource manifestation is interoperability. Escalates to extinction. Whitner 11. Tension between the U.S. and China is clear. The U.S. recently challenged China's claims in the South China Sea into this needs a nuclear war. Not necessarily yet. There are signs that it could. The Kargil war between India and Pakistan should convince us that a nuclear attack by China would immediately slaughter 10 million of the nations. Would be reduced to radioactive wasteland debris. Settled below would blot out the sun and bring on nuclear winter around the globe. Now back to like the hegemony advantage. It's still good. Beckley 12. Declinism will promote trade conflict if Americans reacted to prophecies. Decline officials would come to believe that China is overtaking U.S. Policymakers may imagine the U.S. fearing a window of opportunity. This belief invites reckless behavior, preventive war, hegemonic struggles have been triggered by fears of decline. The perceived erosion of power by fanning such fears. Decline is made promote that type of violent overreaction. Ordinary prosperity or unnatural arms buildups, insecure sea lanes, and closed markets are the most obvious risks. Less anyone have ever international transnational problems such as warming, water scarcity, and disease, which may fester without a leader to rally collective action. If the U.S. abuses its powers not because it is engaged, but because its engagement lacks vision. I only have like 10 seconds. I don't think I can read this.
Yeah, I think it might only be on paper as the issue, so.
I saved a copy. I'll add it to the thread.
see evidence cite any other countries that are actually using PMCs now?
That's probably a question for Travis.
The United Kingdom uses them to a great degree. Lots of countries in Africa use them.
All right,
US
what
government
evidence do you want to see
PMCs in Iraq.
substantiates this?
The TIFER evidence makes that claim,
How do you
as
spell
well as TIEFER, and the other card that comes closest to referencing that is the first piece of Coleman
TIFER
evidence.
is like 4 lines long. Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. used PSCs on a massive scale never seen before. Limits of what they may do matter for wars to come. The U.S. may be drawn into other wars.
A couple things. TIFER says they'll be used in future
Yeah,
conflicts.
no, I get that. But you have made a modeling claim, and I want to know what part of the one I see
The
substantiates
Coleman
that,
evidence?
considering stop that your impact evidence is from 1999.
Cromman is probably the best card that you want to look at. It says, based on empirical evidence, the article concludes we're leading a transformation. That transformation obviously isn't complete now, but it says a growing number of
No,
countries.
but that's my point. Like, you're like, a growing number of countries will do it, but you don't have a single card that substantiates that.
Literally, if you don't think Cromman substantiates that, then like
Where-
your
how do you
reading
spell
skills
that?
are down.
It's the first card on the second
KRAHMAN.
advantage.
Yeah, but how come he
Cromman
doesn't
wrote an
cite-
article about the U.S. as
How come he doesn't
influence
cite-
on
Literally,
other
read the
countries
parentheses.
using
Leader
it.
2010, Chesterman and Leinhardt 2007, Cockman that's a funny name, 2008. Like, it's riddled with citations, and it's
riddled with citations of what? Other speculative assertions? Okay, do you have evidence?
This logic is true of like any debate card ever. Like if you want to look those people up and see if they're making shit up.
Your evidence about PMCs in Iraq is from 2010. Do you have evidence that says we still have PMCs in Iraq?
We're drawing down, but most of our residual security forces are PMCs.
Wait, so that's a no.
That's a fact. Like our Dorel evidence is from 2014.
There are PMCs there. The other internal link is predicated
Your
on
moral
relations.
evidence isn't about PMCs. It's about
So-
relations generally.
Yes, which the I'm sorry. There's also the argument about democracy, which the plan solves.
What, you have to say words?
Well, you're gonna have to
That
say
didn't
words.
mean- what does that mean?
There's an argument about the democratic signal of the plan, and the plan results in some semblance of democracy.
Oh, okay, yeah,
in
but
Iraq,
okay, so
which
you're,
is
so are you
effectively
trying to
a
obviate my
Solvency-
question about do we have PMCs in Iraq with democratic signal? Or
One
like,
there,
what does that
there,
even mean?
one there, there. It's a
What do
factual
relations do
question.
to solve? What do relations do to solve oil shocks?
It means that we can maintain an alliance with the government so that if a crisis breaks out, we can do stuff like secure facilities.
Well, okay, so like there's been a civil war in Iraq going on for quite a while. It's destroyed a ton of the oil fields. What is the propensity for a shock happening?
Similar scenario, but it could spread regionally. The massive war
Well,
could
even if it
spread
spreads regionally, the oil is in Iraq. It's already been attacked.
It's not just in Iraq.
Where else is it?
Like throughout, like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, etc.
And okay, so where in your evidences say that would like the spillover would lead to this?
It makes the claim that there'd be a broader Middle Eastern war which would disrupt oil.
Oh, no, okay,
fields
but
all the time.
then what war is going to occur is a lack of the alliance. Ellis said if there is a crisis, relations or the alliance
The
can help
evidence
contain.
outlines Iran
What
versus
evidence
Saudi
says there
Arabia
will be a
is-
crisis? My
Iran
question is
versus
what?
Saudi Arabia is a dyad that Durrell cites is likely to
We'll take a
occur.
little bit more time. Is this the right card for this?
Yep.
Okay, and then just do this.
Okay.
Now I'll grab this, you guys do this.
Or can you get this out of the way?
Yeah. You want to stick it over by you?
Yeah, I already got it.
Oh yeah, I like silver. It's in
That's the worst idea ever, and I'm going to be really mad if that breaks. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Just put it as lost.
I.
Yes, there is.
Totally down, but we probably should.
I see if you're still in it, Ross.
It's possible.
Okay, sounds good.
They can
Actually, 7 hours for it. Perfect. It's not original, it's just making sure.
Cool.
Of you two.
Oh, wait, there's one thing that didn't save before I sent it. Let me send it one more time. Sorry about that. So use this new version.
I'm just going
Yeah, it just has one different save on it. Okay. 3, the first advantage, and then the second advantage.
1, 2, 3. Advantage 1, advantage 2. Still need to download it.
Okay.
Good to go.
Good.
Topicality, Armed Forces means Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, U.S. Code, no native term, Armed Forces means Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. That does not include contractors. DLC 12 war powers, this is limited to U.S. Armed Forces, does not apply to civilians at war. Civilian contractors have become a large part of American warfighting yet. We're not military personnel, vote negative, including PMCs as an entirely new component to the resolution based on restricting civilian policy, detracts focus on the core war powers question on the topic, and makes adequate priority around research impossible. Independently, new officer voting issue makes it impossible to substantially engage. Disclosure solves all the possible offense they can have, and more adequate research, etc. Second is topicality restrictions or prohibitions on action. China Brown 12 ordinary restrictions not include reporting or monitoring blocks, undefined restrictions, limitations imposed for national content supervised, or oversight restrictions are difficult to agree to supervised conditions but not agree to restrictions license vote negative ground only. Prohibitions on particular authorities guarantee links to every core like flexibility and deference, precision only on interpretation. Defines restriction on authority that's key to adequate preparation, policy analysis. The critique security renders lawfare a tool of violent biopolitical governance. The result is endless violence. Maurici at 11. It is a mistake to characterize the acceptable to biopolitical products not account for active juridical warfare throughout the globe which secures sofas with nations that protect ourselves. The transfer I see far from except U.S. non-established legal section military bounds to access securitization. Security has been invoked in executive powers and emerging powers, but as a permanent kind of security can just frame the world. The assumption that law decoupled from politics access safeguard democracy is false. The key point affirmed by liberal warfare. The military participates in tactics. The rule of law is attacking the liberal pursuit for security defined by biopolitical warfare. But you can make the federation of security is both discourse technique and government results in anti-democratic qualities and military scoring. Movement can prevent permanent emergency in which interventionism are necessitated by primarily need to security volatility. They heard multitary violence, lawfare, you heard lawmaking, extension, U.S. security, U.S. politics, lawfare, focus on attention on this, or that access while army, U.S. nation, something legal privilege, defining horrific violence, mobilization, law, transfer, invasion, while personally not responsible, even something embrace attack of war, legal apparatus, security, legally conditioned, render operational overseas, invention, discourses of security, function, essentially in governing discourses. The discourses have profound part in invoking each discourse, where extraordinary action, it essentially affects military securitization, necessary lawfare, ultimately enables a toxic combination of U.S. geopolitics and biopolitics, defining securitization. Security politics are driven by a fundamental fear of alterity that create the enabling conditions for executive overreach and perpetual violence. Job reading 6, the scholarly take is to reveal how we got here, to unravel the unlimited style, the distinction between war and peace, to raise fundamental question about relating to powers, war relationship, power and violence, and interconnection. The aim is to provide potential tools that might open the agenda, concentrate on the capacity contestation, the location where the emergency might emerge war, permeates the process, their finding is non-executive accountability, legislative scrutiny. Well, it is also crucial to acknowledge war against terrorism is equally important to appreciate the continuity of local life that are enabling conditions of this war, enabling conditions to incorporate local pockets of security, legitimize achieved through discourse of balance, security, and liberty. What is missing in analytical war, extrajudicial assassination, detention. It can be argued, however, what links them as antagonism against the other security included fear because it comes to practice constant war that locates discourse at the heart of politics. The matrix of war is essentially constituted around existential morality, here lies rational exclusion based on the fear of the exclusion practice or projected upon those terms of security. If you need a removal such that lies in the heart of counterterrorism measures direct war. One, opposite the limited military efforts, however, constructed in terms of emergency war permeates politics so that these might come subject to practice constituted in terms of security against existential threat. The discipline of China is not institutional procedures, rather the constituted elements of war. Continuity war is not simply isolated occurrence, but as peaceful war is integrated with war. President political life elements that enable action on the world that implies continuity source between discipline and violent. Government sovereignty is a Western construct that ignores alternate forms of political organization. Status quo legal regimes not only inevitably fail to contain the after effects, but also result in violent extermination of alterity. Mahmoud 10. Colonial demarcation progress resistance from below. The result is territorial disputes. The line is a story of conflict and inability of existing legal regimes to resolve them. Imperial efforts to resolve boundaries completely with facts of nationality, property, frontiers, or mobility. Sovereignty deemed preserved nation existing within defined area territory seeking composed of equality and international law. Underscores this extends recognition to Western political organization demarcation with local art, history, culture, geography, crisis stems from artificial boundaries and non-common first nation state with upon post-colonial formation the doctrine of treat acquisition of territories given becomes an instrument to maintain status quo and peace and imaginary resolution of conflicts. The brief frame of boundaries renders history moot. Conflicts reveal the mandated fixity does not keep these conflicts in check. The decolonization raised specter of disorder and the transition from colonialism proceeded with the requirement of boundaries remain this bias in the heart of favor existing state augmented by doctrinal with friendly political implication that remains at the heart of international law. Reject the affirmative fear-driven politics. Critical analysis of politics of security and resultant militarism gives us a new political vocabulary with which to articulate a truly democratic politics. Activating your role as an ethical educator is the only way to avert permanent warfare. Giroux 13. Massive inequality.
Do you want blue or
Blue. Okay. Massive inequality points to the need for critical analysis. These developing terms clarify power resistance must be mobilized globally with such challenges only take place in political, pedagogical, education center, action structures to disperse desire, strong subjectivities, and refuse violence. What is needed are notes, analysis on common emerging, industrial, and academic complexes. Challenging warfare has an important educational component. It's impossible to separate an authoritarian order from cultural apparatus and ownership. Our sense of pedagogical and political tasks is creating public spheres would enable them to engage citizens in higher education and becoming militarized knowledge factories, creating a culture equipped with knowledge fundamentals. It will be impossible to resist the normalization of war. Any viable resistance must address your needs to be pedagogical, matched down, academia, activity, and agency, and pedagogical essentials to the definition of what constitutes political and practice and makes it meaningful critical understanding of enemies, conform action, effective understanding of debates only brought by breaking hardware, common sense, illustration, surveillance of fear, illustrations, local critical lines, terms of rapidly clips of radical imagination, challenge must include that where the agency must be imagined. Hegemony is a paranoid fantasy, the strategy of omnipotency, threats to empire everywhere, it necessitates constant violence. You have an obligation to play structural violence. That hegemony invisibilizes at the core of your decision calculus, not their impacts. McClintock 9. We cannot understand the extravagance of violence committed unless we grasp the dialects of respect the power taking shape around fantasy, omnipotence, control society, with that mission, depending on the the domain of paranoia, only paranoia finds no dreams, absolute power, forebodings, approach to fantasy, limit the war against boundaries, to make it visible, the battle political challenge, conceal imperial violence, we need to illuminate the continuities that connect these circuits, those intellectual inquiry as well, political responsibility, not only extend the shaft for war, imperialism is not something that happens elsewhere, empire must be from within the stable tension, reduce terror, violence, we need a long look at method which is the whole essential paranoia and ordinary people, imperial state, things such as evoking types of barbarians, and 9/11 comes a solution by enemy deficit. Hegemony is based on our... Okay, case. The plan's ad hoc restriction does nothing to alter the political structure that sustains bureaucratic control of security policy, legal bandage, probably illusion of constraint, but do nothing. Glenn 14 potential remedies. Do not match any muscles that not have legislative performed. Mirroring state series improved congressional oversight of drone killing cyber law reviews brim with such proposals. Their stopgap measure has been tried repeatedly. Its futility is glaring. Why such efforts would be any more frivolous, hard to understand. Continue to focus on legalist bandage buttresses the illusion that Madisonian institutions are alive and well. This deflects attention from what is a malady. What is needed is a fundamental change in the discourse within security policies. Make checks would replicate and relocate failed Madisonian institutions without controlling forces that would be hollowed out. No impact in hegemonic decline. Fair waste love. There's no evidence to support relationship between U.S. active stability decline. 90 U.S. cut defense and 900 billion defense were not based on has been a norm against war. One, not expected to split the world will be more peaceful. U.S. cut forces, no state banning extra arms, no balancing the world. Active wars on present control. Two, no evidence regarding the action of saying USS peaceful defense are unregulated by U.S. military, by the world can operate effectively without a policeman. Hegemonic retrenchments key to avoid great power. Montiero and 12 beats conflict. Strategic option available to Uniform produce conflict. The conflict will continue use power made for honor. This engagement is the best strategy. This is for decrease pressure for prolonged strategies of dominance or self-defeating minor powers. Both capabilities would drag the U.S. into conflict and result in increasing powers. Minor powers become recalcitrant by U.S. power. Unipolar does not give the unipolar greater influence. Unipolar has to go to cease their own destruction only by exercise restraint can avoid it. Wars if unipolar fails exercise restraint takes develop nukes. Restraint the same more power does not lead to greater influence. Leadership is not key to overall peace, freedom, and intent. Our focus on conflict, theoretical, and empirical foundations for this claim are weak. It overestimates America's contribution to stability in Europe. Forces contribute little peace in Asia. History suggests that the U.S. deployment's rivals will achieve a stable balance without it. Alliances outlasting conditions that cause them Japan, Western Europe, and South Korea grew wealthy enough to defend themselves. Alliances drag us into wars. And do you want no transition or? Okay, no transition wars, best empirical theory, McDonald 11. U.S. is right to like the initiative through disputes and retrenchment, not a single weakness that hegemonic transition is confluent as deductive, and empirical reasons without this fallen hegemonic still formable capability, which threatens anything that are no longer targeted for balancing powers that eliminate the burdens without exposing vulnerabilities. The empirical right suggests conclusion transition not appear more conflict. The last verse will resolve without confrontation, similar factors, cushion, impending transition, given gradual decline in incentives for either side or minimal China's few incentives to report U.S. weakness given the economy, gradual retrenchment need not unleash destabilizing the members and dilemmas advantage too. Leadership's not key to global public good, doesn't solve any of their impacts. Parable 10. Scholars question more than hegemonic stability theory. Papers not even police by single power economies, drilling manufacturing, termination, decline, and was not supposed to any new conflict. If the U.S. were drawn on multi-power colony questions of credible alternatives to the U.S. conservative police and no impact in norm setting, friendly democracies will selectively ignore bad U.S. norms, and authoritarian nations won't care anyway. We're system foreign nations decide to adopt our good norms and avoid our bad ones. The claim that U.S. norms will have harmful effects, and other nations will copy them seem doubtful. Democratic nations use their own political process to on American norms that might have caused harm. Third states select norms that serve those in power regardless of those norms we have. Sometimes they cite our norms as cover for the decisions, but the crucial word here is cover. They would have adopted the same rules anywhere. Iraqi stability doesn't spill over. That's your impact to relations. K. Intent regional potential and only especially in response to internal Iraqi outcomes worse fact failure and wrong. I mean, help by neighboring states proven resilient. If internal stability creates an impotence to intervene will be stronger. Although military intervention is Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Gulf states are likely to fund partners while eschewing intervention. No impact to oil shocks. They won't happen. Con 11 will Middle Eastern oil disruption across the economy. New research suggests no. A major tenet of foreign policy may be fundamentally wrong, but growing research suggests that this view of oil shocks is wrong. The economy is less susceptible to Russian scholars found that the market is remarkably adaptable, surprisingly quick at compensating for shareholders. U.S. economy is less dependent on purchasing oil and less sensitive to changes in prices. No terminal Middle Eastern war impact in Ethiopia. 9 cook and 7 leaders are interested in self-preservation. Arab armies are gearing towards regime protection rather than protecting powers have low capability. There's no precedent for Arab leaders to commit forces to conflicts that they are not directly involved. Arab countries have compelling issues after the hegemony of Lebanon never commit forces civil war regarded as someone else fight given experience of conflict region of Northern King strike and Brent conflict resembling the entire Middle East. SDS tension may be inevitable, will never escalate even if they win a huge internal link. Meet on 12 tensions are likely to persist. Political dimension 10 argue that the SDS will remain turbulent turbulent, the risk of miscalc is high, but these skirmishes are unlikely to escalate within China. Cooler heads are likely to prevail, but China's top brass will be reluctant to escalate. China realizes that the cost of conflict is too high since it will disrupt trade flows.
Give me a second. I'm gonna like shift over there. Let's do this here. All right. First question is, why doesn't your case D link to your epistemology indites?
Which case do
Let's say the dudes who work at Cato, like Friedman.
Because we haven't indicted think tank scholarship writ large.
Okay. Then what parts of scholarship have you indicted? Just like when we say
the
balance.
belief in the necessity of hegemony, the idea that other countries are racing towards a form of military.
We haven't just read
Okay.
writ large like
How does let's go with McClintock. How does she come to her conclusions?
Empirical analysis.
Of what?
And of the history of U.S. foreign policy, and specifically on the violence that's enacted post 9/11. Our evidence indicates, you can use analytical tools using discourse analysis to prove that.
Oh yeah, I was waiting for you to say psychoanalysis. I don't think.
No, I didn't say psychoanalysis.
Okay, well, when you
I said
do,
discourse
when you
analysis.
do, I'm just going to ask this now, just to save
We're
time.
not going to, or maybe, no promises, but we're probably not going to. McClintock definitely does not rely on any psychoanalytic theories.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's fine. So your jabbery evidence citing Agamben is talking about existential threats in the context of like Europe in like the definition of Christianity. How do you know that our violence leads to extinction?
Well, I think there's actually a pretty.
Yeah, I disagree with the contextualization of that.
Oh,
Like, this card is about how war permeates the political process, the defining influence on executive answerability, legislative scrutiny. It explicitly references things like the.
Let me ask the simple version of the question. How do you know our stuff leads to extinction? What is the methodology by which you reach that conclusion?
Christian, whatever you were talking about, you can draw a connection between the theological investment in hegemony and.
That sounds like psychoanalysis to me.
No, what?
A theological investment? Does that just like so when we say an impact,
No,
that
I'm
means we're
just saying,
theologically
you're
invested
talking
in it?
this. I was just answering the assertion that you made in this evidence about like.
I mean, it literally, all right, before you say that herein lies racial exclusion based on fear of the other, it's literally saying, hence the relativities which with European politicians speak about the idea of Europe and its Christian origins, and then it's citing Agamben 95 parenthetically. What the hell does that have to do with
The
this?
idea that identity is formed through opposition, i.e. in order to create the coherent idea of a U.S. hegemon, there needs to be a threat external to that, has nothing to do with psychoanalysis.
Okay, gotcha. So how does Monteiro measure war? So it causes war. How does he measure it?
He uses he's indicting Wolford's study, and he's
Yeah,
using
how does
a
Monteiro
robust-
measure it?
I think it's like 18 different. It's like a
Like
compilation
what is-
of 18 different studies.
I
and laws
don't
on
mean
his
like who
own
he cites. I
research.
mean like literally the variable war. How does he define that variable? Like what is war to Monteiro?
I'm not 100% sure.
It's conflict between the major powers.
Okay, gotcha. So are we at war right now by that definition?
We are in a war in Afghanistan.
Are we, by Montero's definition, are we at war? Yes or no?
Probably.
Okay, gotcha. Can you kick the alt? Okay, just sort of as like kind of an alt type of question, like what two options do you think the judge is comparing? Like between the F and
The
neg?
investigation of the discourse of the 1AC and the critical methodology endorsed by the negative.
So voting F means that they should not investigate things? Like why is that? Why are
Well,
we stuck with that?
we've made link arguments that your understanding of foreign policy necessarily includes other understanding, so like,
Gotcha.
yes.
We'll take one. I already did.
T prohibition, T armed forces, advantage 2, advantage 1, the critique.
What was the order of T?
T prohibition, so the second T violation, T armed forces, advantage 2, the K. I did.
So before or after the dog advantage?
The what advantage?
The dog is
Almost.
Oh.
Good job, good effort.
You almost got me there. Just want to make sure I sent this. That I did.
Yeah.
I thought he was gonna.
I almost got the choo-choo train the other day, or a couple months ago. That was close.
No idea who that is.
Tommy Pachakes, the choo-choo train.
That's a pretty good nickname.
Did you all have less of it? Hello, Miles.
Fuck are they filming?
Yeah, there is like a movie outside the street. Oh god.
Really weird.
He's not bored or
It's not gonna work.
Okay. The plain text has been struck by statute. This is a solvency question, not one of topicality, counter-interpretation, limitation, CNA. We assume obvious meaning the restriction is limitation, complication, and the common definition of the word. Restriction of limitation by the English and unlocked by, and was not only sexually required to insolvent English and unlocked by, prohibited from driving any vehicle, not equal to these limitations, considered a restriction of animal to drive in circumstances otherwise available for further interpretation as arbitrary exclusion flies in the face of the core meaning and turns influenced by creating a faulty division of ground over limiting prohibitions dramatically, over limits gets to skirt the core topic literature and evades questions of oversight. It decimates after and innovation which are vital to the depth of education. Thereafter, there's no defense of binding restrictions in ESR drastically limits the topic. Reasonability, competing interpretations are bad and cause a race at the bottom. The next T violation we meet, they have no ebb about military combatant companies. Eisenberg, 9 3 categories, animals, and companies by force cable of combat. These constitute a tiny minority of PMCs. Counter interpretation, combat counters under I law. Hop in 2008 contrast can be immersed in force with the hiring article 3B. This need not open the floodgates. It's taken avoid responsibility. Demonstrate the contrary with neither for course nor for self-defense unless the state already incorporates personnel with stable face less responsibility to those persons. Soldiers face the gap states will legally quote as minimized responsibility obligation. I shall narrow this gaps in contrast section course of can be attributed to hiring state members of the armed force where they in organized group and are expected to shoot back. The hiring will be responsible. The clear case will be combat actors' reasons to prefer AFGROUND and topic education. The Constitution and the realities of modern warfare dictate the inclusion of the affirmative. The framers of the Constitution did otherwise. Circumvention beats every F as per the Georgetown PMC circumvention. DA they over limit armed force staffs are limited ESR power of the person non-binding CBs. No limits or precisions. Often we include one more F and assume real world meanings. New Fs are good and obviously not a voting issue. A strict offense defense paradigm cause a bad model of decision making. Their key to creativity and understand the contours of the topic. Now the case they have no evidence about PMCs. The first two pieces of evidence are hopelessly generic. The Kramen evidence says a U.S. lead role is critical because of market capitalization and the amount of PMCs that they have in Iraq and Afghanistan. The second card is about application of international human rights law, which doesn't matter. We will concede argument 3, argument 4, argument 5, and argument 6. South China Sea conflict does escalate. The Whitner evidence says that it's prone to miscalculation of a status quo, which is something only interoperable forces are capable of solving. China wars increasingly likely. These status quo Zanko 324 war words not preordained intentions, right, and that fiercely contest orders to be in South Tennessee, the attention, Dr. Arnold, clear declines or sovereignty or significant sinking point views to be drawn into comments over disputed in function, especially since the U.S. has treaties with Japan, the Philippine transparency and predictability of military conflict. The other advantage we do solve, they have no evidence specific to our mechanism, defer to specificity, and the question of the cake is broad. Overarching theories obviously do not apply to the context of PMC regulation. The plan results in binding international norms, which are effective legal restrictions, are good tools, and the asked technical approach is the best heuristic for mediating ethical concerns. Calplusos, not Canelopoulos, and 7 is important, not assuming the general existence and structural discontent. Cannot be the solution legal regulation piece of words possible necessary is best used legal tools and more the rules be effective. Always be room for manipulation. Any approach words and technical solution legal governance on our substance and more we can minimize any this one outside no moral choices, but will provide useful tools to assess legal for levels and legal claims can the way for showing some objective social line power. Factors manipulate loopholes are real by accepting law for an abort justification. The attached so need to know, but exactly as I said in the ground. Law for not substitutes for legal analysis. Legal constraints are what make political constraints effective. Huck and 12 Congress and of course specifically constraints substitute can be first side. Focal points for organized coalition to enable resistant good faith lawing, low constraint option, legal rules furnish a solution of transaction info. Class firms to the public to challenge policy or best with authority to draw attention. They can disseminate info and lower the cost of that lab tools from the executive ranging from politically damaging criticism to enactment of new rules binding the president, extending prohibition, make coordination easier because violation is evidence that an act is evidence is undesirable. The next argument is Fetweiss. He's wrong. Beaton 11. Fetweiss made a number of assumptions that have been invalidated. At least two schools of thought, but Fetweiss ignores this division. Despite the evidence, the world does not contain some dangerous elements. Single percent of chilling picture, nuclear and against Fetweiss say supposed to seem to be part of our that's for explanation why they should be the guest. Fetweiss underestimates the extent to which you assume the condition rank vigorously. Fetweiss thinking specifically but the assumption that politics the enemy of strategy. Also, Monteiro is 2. Wolf for 12. Unipolarity is peaceful. The most peaceful ever in unipolarity. Does not know by the end of comics simply means they have somewhere more degree of power traits, but it fails to escape this comic research unit that the post 1990 system is the least afflicted by war. There are many ways in which all those measures we are living the most peaceful period. There's no less violence time use of American Iraq and Afghanistan. We are critical to peace. The Friedman evidence is by a Cato hack. We've never had an impact to the economy or trade liberalization, which doesn't matter. Yes, transition wars the one you see Beckley evidence indicates that other countries will lash out and the United States will be desperate, which means it's a dissent to the alternative. Also, history proves our argument. Schweller 2011 history tells us structurally really and for peaceful history is most of the economists and more ways wherever the law uneven growth states which use with a more concentrated power within a large enough to disjuncture the system counters this equilibrium and serious crimes and growth and keep histories intense competition shifts and gender stereotypically growing states apply as far as now the K proper Morrissey is false and we control uniqueness. Treasure 12/2017 progress effective brand features all U.S. here in history of their data and country we look at inequality keep vendors from mortality disease income are trending in the right direction. The smallest fraction of the population will be in poverty whether it's crime discrimination war the aggregate shows most people war the U.S. will considerable power which is why children should be such a U.S. multi-power same time coming in Central African Republic as well as in the Philippines. 2014 could be a breakthrough. Your threat inflation would get our authors fired. Raven all 9 the notion of security practice looking for enemies is what is missing. This comes with threat inflation is why the national security roles embody objective in their treatment of threats and to be transparent and peer reviewed on the basis of accurate intelligence. They make it their business of worth threats those threats are not socially constructed people are far percent student analysis something important writing on the production evidence seeking would risk career termination. Our speech act doesn't cause securitization guns really tend to cause out of the decision the actor has been criticized positive effect construction make clear a single speech does not discourse but is over through a long process. Single speech will not securitize an issue. The reductive understanding of war makes it a useless metaphor. Chandler in a non-critical theory of global war and danger reducing the risk more abstract statements and understanding wars that decline global power theory abstract critiques because political stakes are never in question. These critical frameworks global war it's understood the aspiration for control of this framework becomes increasingly abstract from also a contemporary social relation. In this context global war becomes a little more than a metaphor. Like jobbery evidence assumes that catastrophes disempower action, but they focus on practical solutions. What now intend the notable features of perilous time you may face is that we roll up our sleeves and work on practical solutions. There have been few panics involving rational behavior. None of this can matter so it's time where down the correct interpretation lines would essentially translate social communication would not have intentional warning people respond in ways that incorporate problem solving into ordinary context and enervating theories and not assume there's no catch-all solution to structural violence. More and forth, there may be an emphasis that factors not motive aggression is not the existence of factors, but rather restricting to that is key to controlling war. Certainly, if we were to press a button and end poverty, racism, and endless disputes we want to indeed government social media committees a policy that produce a better world by all measure of human progress given the difficulty of making many of the social problems and approach to war depending on their solution may doom us to war for generations. Discourse does not shape reality. Balskov 5 threats do not depend on language. We hazards for life crimes or language not constructive as a shape of perception of it is not useful or empirically credible. The whole what we say about a problem would determine essence. What I say about a typhoon would not change just better institutional. Some recommend regardless of external objective developments affect securitization. There's no they don't solve sovereignty because no one will accept changes to it. Brooks and 12 sovereignty is more functional than any available alternative fundamental alternative to the existing sovereignty regime. Or now welcome sovereignty has worked better than any other structure, but decision makers have been able to envision or organize crime is the best we can do. It exists on the status quo, and the plan does not make existing sovereignty. It does not reify existing sovereignty structures any more than the alternative. The transition away from sovereignty would be net more violent. The one you see evidence indicates the state monopoly solely on the use of force is something that solves distinction only a congressional signal solves the truth. The plan is both necessary and sufficient to solve, and the alternative is critical, and investigation does not do that. Permutation, do the plan, and reject fear-driven politics. The alternative is not feasible. Restraints on the use of force are key to limiting violence. The alt just some hippie crap. L stand 5. Brooke fails to spell out an alternative solves off the ethical limits the use of force by matching in a world in which such has simply melted away eliminating the political spaces. Saying what I call for his role to sensate not purpose of a state is not necessary just to endorse a restraint of the world can be made less but broken. I resist a flight into utopianism. Accountabilities are problems to deal with. Requires mass institutional arrangements, purpose, and a concept of arrangements of the world characterized for murders, jihadists, child soldiers, and the rest. It is for states that person organized once they do anything connected. Assume the world is assume that a world that will never be perpetual piece of fantasy, eliminating fear range, including injustice, not possible. Brooke calls this enemy. Securities almost requires the dismantling of human as we know them. There's never been a which harm comic has been asked the challenge is not to eliminate, but rather to limit the occasions for word of chasten over ambition. Use of force citizens requires some set of workable set of principles that places limits on the use of force. Those who endorse utopian visions neglect the hard political work. The contrast between perpetual peace and perpetual war ignores that nuance. Giroux is a loser in his hyperbolic language proves that how utopian is the alt is. Giroux and no date again. Political and cultural working their change match because I prepare for my tenure. My experience changed my perception. The little some having published video was deeply tangent over. Maybe this also asked why I wrote such suggestion. Maybe offer he suggested that I studied logic with him. I can maintain my salary. I declined the offer and have to send a numerous job application. Working class intellectuals do not fare well in the culture of higher education, especially when they are on the left. The alternative and the link arguments independently cause lash out. The one you see back the evidence in a case that causes a breakdown of overall international institutions. The Dresner evidence is statistical data and says the world is getting better in the status quo. The Brooks evidence says it's independently key to alliance commitments, which is something they cause things like proliferation, which is independently bad, causes miscalculation, security dilemmas that necessarily would spiral and escalate, even if it's not an advantage to the planet. It's essentially the alternative. Our advantage is not based on myopic security discourse. Multiple independent fields roll forth in a 9 mainstream theories positive that states come to blows over national status quo only when its implication for those the assumption into my cumulative research and disciplines ranging from neuroscience and biology to economics, anthropology, and psychology of human beings are powerfully motivated for several favorable status research suggests that preference for state is a basic disposition. Your K is just a bunch of non-falsifiable conspiracy theories running in and still treating They forget to mention some of there is no serious consideration, alternate explanation, and distributing a purpose decision made by disparate entities and resemble conspiracy theories. Critical security says remarkably and critical careful investigation is replaced with the affirmation of foregone conclusions. I screwed up in sending a doc, did I not?
There's no
Yes.
that hasn't been listed.
What did I send out then?
You said half, like it's like a half complete doc. So the T things are there, and there's like 2 of the K.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so sorry about that.
Sorry, it's only been 9 minutes back.
Yeah. Sorry.
If you want to like take some prep,
No, it's fine. It's
No, just
open it up.
Although, like, it'll take like a minute of your prep. How about that?
Okay,
Maybe
30.
Maybe 2.
30.
if you want 30, you can take 30.
We will take 30 seconds of your prep.
Can I use
Well,
it
not
too,
ours,
though?
just like.
Oh, yeah, we can use
No,
it.
it has to be on yours.
No, of yours. but
Okay.
We can all use it.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm done with that.
It has been sent.
Okay, let us open it, and then we'll do 30 seconds of your prep. Give us a second to open it. So I'll look for it. Verify the text.
This one had a lot more kilobytes, so I think it's fine. 124 versus 61. I think that one's the proper one.
I'll tell you what it is.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah, this looks more right. You have those? You have the,
No. Let me just look through it.
you got it also?
Yeah.
Alright, we're gonna take 30 now.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'll my house.
Yeah, actually move this.
I want to read their end.
No, totally serious.
Totally fair.
What is it?
I'm not taking it away from you, but I'm moving it for now. How about that?
Yeah, then.
That's cool. I'll just chill.
Okay.
Yo, Pappas.
Yeah.
I really forgot what I was gonna say.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's 30.
Yes.
Okay. So the impacts left Pappas or hedge in China, and what is this alliances business? You have an independent pluralist thing, or are you just saying that's
Well, the alliance is just predicated on hegemonic decline. It's not like
Okay.
how we
And,
solve.
and so on the,
That
just
like
to
90
clarify on Monopoly, the only impact left is SCS.
But
Right?
there's that-
Well,
that
no.
90
There's the
right?
external state use of force impact,
Okay, yep.
which was extended as a breakdown of sovereignty is bad, which is something we solve. So state sovereignty, China, head.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about like hedge stuff. Why? So you read all these indicts. What is the method that people like Dresner and the people you've read roll forward use to decide when wars are up or down?
I mean, is your question just what constitutes a war, or like how they make that?
Like what study did Dresner use in 2013 to say that
I
war
mean,
is
he just
down?
looked at aggregate amounts of war, violence, battle deaths.
Okay, and his definition of war is?
Dresner's definition
Yeah.
of war? I'm uncertain of what Dresner's definition of war is, but the
So
other piece
what
of evidence
is-
we've read
Sure,
defines it as like global
it's
violence.
something
PMCs
called,
are
like, the
crucial.
cow
PMCs are
theory.
crucial to hegemony because of allied interoperability, or are there other things?
There's a claim of allied interoperability, there's a claim of mission effectiveness, there's a claim that we alienate international allies.
There's a claim of public support in the one I see as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and all of those things matter more than the 1990s defense cuts. Why?
Well, I mean, our RF speaks to current U.S. grand strategy, which
Yeah,
obviously
R1 and
postdates the
CM is like
1990
these were
defense
massive
strategy.
cuts in the 90s. That did not deck.
Yeah, that was also
why-
like the peace dividend after the Cold War. If anything, that vindicates hedge.
Okay, so monopoly advantage. Why South China Sea lash out? When are they going to do it?
When will they do it? We've read Ev from Zenko on 325 that says tensions are escalating.
Okay,
Might
and
happen in the next
tensions have
couple
been
days.
high
who
over
knows?
territorial disputes for 2 years. So like seriously, like when?
I mean, our RF says that the propensity is unique in 2014. You've
Okay,
read
and
Ev from
RF
2010.
says
You've
RF
read
from
Ev like-
2012 says that propensity has always existed, but they always come back from the brink. What F do you have that says they're
I
going to
mean,
go over the red
We've
line?
made a claim that absent allied interoperability, the likelihood of that escalating is unique. So interoperability exists
So
now.
which
it's broken
allies
down
are
absent
preventing
a plan.
China from attacking now?
RF speaks to like Japan and the Philippines.
Japan and the Philippines. Okay, cool. The quick question on the T thing. Which card do you think has an intent to define for including PMCs?
I think the Hop card is
Okay,
great.
can you leave me the best line on armed forces include PMCs?
Contractors can be members of the armed forces of the hiring state under Article
but this
3
is
and Article
not a
91. This need not
definition.
open up the floodgates.
Pappas, that intent to define card. Your counter-interpretation is just like, contextually, this is what contractors could be.
No.
Which
We
card
have
says
said
armed
that
forces, contractors are included?
international law includes contractors, which
And
is
why
what
should
our
we abide by
interpretation does.
international law and
Because
talk
the
about
alternative,
UFG policy?
the alternative is that states will circumvent their own domestic laws as a means to
But the
include
U.S.
private
code
contractors.
says PMCs.
U.S.
are
code does
included.
not say that. It says U.S. armed forces, but it does not say that they must be members of the armed forces.
Okay, that's fair. We'll take more notes.
It's like the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, but it raises the question.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the thing I was gonna.
Yeah.
I just remembered that I have this. So I'm assuming it will extend to you. You want to argue about that?
Yeah. Oh my god, my mother sent me the most ridiculous set of emails ever.
Of course.
It's a picture of my sister with a thumbs up.
Give me 30 seconds. Just for that.
Not a real one.
Okay.
They don't post them here. Yeah.
Oh, so you're still.
Yeah. I think you're doing 4.
Oh,
We'll see. We'll see. I won't go watch it too, so I'm good. We'll,
you want to go?
some more fancy. This time.
Good. 42.
Alright, that's the guy. There's not really everything right now. And we're good?
No speech, Zach. I feel like an ass.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't send it.
No email.
This is just payback.
Good stuff.
Although I don't know if I can afford 30 seconds of our prep at this point. Okay, that's done. We're good?
They rid this world, giving better called the alternative obviously doesn't reject the diffusion of vaccines, etc. There's no intrinsically link between that and hegemony. Our argument is that it criticizes the system that results in an absolute differential of power. All of their evidence that it talks about inequality decreasing, the talks about relative levels, however, on an absolute level, inequality is massively decreasing. The methodology is flawed. Eurocentric war per capita is a terrible metric. The past 2 centuries have been exceptionally violent. The trend is only increasing. Your role should be to look at the enabling conditions for violence and not rest your faith in our luck so far. Brommuller, 13th and 20th century was speculative validity. The result of the evidence that the war to be taken, 7 year old piece that followed this argument that attributes her war to change the 20 world against the piece that elements that number of peaceful periods that what happens when an order of human missile cars, the piece only slightly less happened chance by 2 world wars, the authors generate the appropriate measure of war per death per capita. It is not always have quantity related to war permanence, the population outpacing more than the population growth is exponential. We hardly should be surprised that's war cannot be kept the best way to engage war in its nature, and the nation should be the frequency of frequency with which they run the risk of the average little justification for example, the only great more average than European states common in the last 2 centuries than more than prevalent liberty from capitalist world lead similar conclusion the overall trends still upward the trends are far from one described the decline of war these whole part of the Sherman notice suggestion of the upward trend in rate of public initiation with the propensity for using force of examined measure use of force per capita dialectic controls trends simultaneously result of various little resemblance to decline of violence over time. The abstract construction of the most likely scenario for mass violence which proves the enabling factors argument I was making above Herman 12 institution factors the military judgment cause purple horses the business they're the most potential for percentage of here more weight politician than empathy speculative sort of thing but the increased absolute violence by independent population but based on the US Vietnam backward independent factors the great powers should not blame usual start this and not they present the precarious wars against the role of the field of the great paragraph find that still on is the global task force permanent worse is the fuel by threats manufactured by the institutional church they cannot contribute to overwhelm our better arrangers now, they say that they are not threatened inflation. This evidence says that people in the bureaucracy and the national security structure would lose their jobs if they made wrong predictions. Or blended evidence is fantastic. It indicates you cannot control the true security network governance indicates that there is an internal bureaucracy within the executive branch that ultimately that the Congressional and Judicial stacks only serve to legitimize that argument indicates it creates a facade of accountability for the public and ultimately has zero real control over it, which means our 1C evidence means you need to look at the discourse of the 1C before evaluating legal debates because they displace broader ethical question. They say that there's one speech act doesn't cause security. Obviously, our argument is not that the 1C directly is the end all be all of security power. Jab evidence indicates you need to look away the security it is constituted in public spaces like debate through the proliferation of discourses and academic spaces. Our argument indicates that is inextricably linked to the way the war terror operates by construction of national identity vis-a-vis violent or racial war. Read this channel evidence. This evidence just says that critical theories have bad understanding of global war. We are not some nebulous global war impact. Our argument is that there is massive amount of structural violence going on in the Senate is a result of U.S. interventions, and our McClintock evidence from the 1T indicates that it causes pyrotechnic displays of violence on the part of the United States by the thousands and thousands of innocent people we have killed. 11 years from today, some of the legal arguments here, they add the PMCs into the chain of command just so means we can secure them for exemptions from the International Criminal Court of Justice, like we do when we lock in sofas, like we do with Iraq, which is what the 1C's advantage. So when they do things like rape prostitutes that come to your military bases, they are exempt from international liability. Incorporating them in the chain of command only naturalizes that system of violence and fails to interrogate the root causes of the hegemony impact from relies on a notion of proliferation. Their evidence relies on the security dilemma that starts with these some of the states act like black boxes that ignores the possibility for cooperation and dialogue in the international arena. Also double turns and norms arguments because they use differential models of international relations, i.e. if offensive realism is true, like Richard Wolff was talking about, that there's no way the norms arguments are true, that proves that instead of focusing on the proliferation of security dilemmas within different models by R, you should look at the ontological group which connects them all, which is the fear of fundamentally violent fear of alterity. Also ignores the way the U.S. contributes to the supply side of proliferation by our expansive policies because the United States tries to invade countries and they think their only defense against that is a nuclear weapon. Or hey, their chief evidence is the U.S. Their chief evidence want to see the U.S. Their internal hegemony says the U.S. will be irresistibly drawn to Yemen, Somalia, and Pakistan, and hence the lesson that we should hope that Congress learns the lesson. This is a perfect example of why how juridical focus misdirects our political analysis is really the lesson we should learn from the 1AC that we should hope Congress learns this lesson. Rather, our argument is that the lesson we should learn is that we need to critique the idea that those interventions are irresistible. Those interventions are not necessarily inevitable. Our argument is that they rely on a fantasy of omniscience that sees threats of existence everywhere, and this relies on an active process of looking for new threats which lead to inevitable proliferation. Because the United States can only define its security vis-a-vis its identity as a hegemony vis-a-vis other nations that it constitutes threats. Our indicates after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we needed there was an enemy deficit, and fundamentally the war and terror became to fill that gap, which means the affirmative law was built to isolate some threat to the United States hegemony. But you have to look at the epistemological process of identity formation that underlies that, which is where I was going in the 1AC cross-section. Now, the Van Arvold evidence in the 1AC says that the proliferation of violence and the propensity for the impact arises from the fact that the third world has not developed institutions to deal with violence. This ignores the foundational violence that colonialism has done in the third world. For example, in Somalia, Somaliland developed totally independently of democratic Western structures, and is yet the most relatively stable region. However, all the rest of Somalia that was divided up through the Berlin Conference during the 19-somethings is being wrecked in the Senate bar. Movement evidence indicates that's why I to reject that. Focus on sovereignty is fundamentally a Western contradiction. Ignores internal contradictions within that ultimately leads to a proliferation of violence. And in the case, also they've just like actually China link. Arjun is going to read some D on that. They say practical. We need to do practical solutions. This evidence is not about the securitization of fear in the context of foreign policy. Just like when humans get scared, they can roll up their sleeves. Great. They say there's no solution to structural violence or alternative evidence says you should adopt the position of critical analysis in response to the affirmative and test and paranoid call for action. The critique causes you in different roles and educated rather than adopting the position of a policymaker evaluating the consequence of immediate action. You should go negative to enact our critical analysis of the 1AC because the flawed system of thought from which the plan of the 1AC pedagogy has a crucial role in increasing authoritarian culture dominated by fear. It's only last sight for truly political and ethical thought reviews of the blackmail of the 1AC instead focused on creating a critical vocabulary of analysis that reveals the interconnections between militarized knowledge production and ongoing state violence, which is our job here ourselves as well from the 1AC. That's a necessary prerequisite to mobilizing effective resistance against the entrenchment of the current warfare state. The only way to solve the case Rana 12 pilots supporting the collective system that you send one of the procedural solution emphasizing you for judicial sort of the mistake question of policy more lost scholars nor they get accepted which government practice or already background of political but effective technicalities pretty and necessity to insulate decision making they send the Americans to commit states danger and sale in the institution regardless of legal form of operating central on the hands for the enjoy military security expertise and systematic difference challenge security must begin to show the underlying subject knowledge that a pumping that validity to repeat no be substantive to the constitutional policy unless based such a base of words with the effect of relative dimension become ever more entrenched. Some of their evidence I didn't cite when I was making my link arguments but I meant to their Sager and Williams evidence in the non-blind part says that outsourcing
PMC is deeply troubling to Americans concerned with conserving democratic accountability and transparency at home because those deficits bear on international stability. The 1AC does nothing to resolve broader accountability deficits within the executive branch, which proves the argument I was making about Glennon, about why you have to focus on the fundamentally discursive role that security plays in creating the expansive security network. They say that discourse does not create reality. The evidence says the way we describe a typhoon does not impact it. This conflates social and physical reality. The United States hegemony is fundamentally structured around discourse. That was the argument I was explaining above. The fact that they read a public backlash internally to hegemony means that they cannot just say the United States will inevitably lash out. It's a constructed ideology that the United States has accepted, but it is by no means inevitable. And critical analysis and adopting a position of critical theory vis-a-vis problem solving is necessary to break down that inevitability and reveal how these seemingly descriptive claims are actually normatively valued. And they say the sovereignty is inevitable. They say the sovereign. Oh wow, I skipped a ton of stuff I want to read. They say the sovereignty is inevitable. You should reject the forced choice of international universality, align yourself with those living under contemporary conditions of colonialism, opens up political space for alternatives. Mom and Jet, the demarcation matters of political act, the international social colonialism, legalized hegemony, the disorganization, even just order the colonial world, the order subject in space, the geographical demarcation, political rules, international limits, colonial cartography, cities, such as colonial commerce, international liability, free, sort of past when addressing these conflicts, the laws, war, problem, solution, and action, political communities, territorial states, primary challenges, political being central hurdles remain, necessity break free international geography, system economies, and under divine legal contradiction theories have to be exerted the first of all increase of those online, drawn by international law. Obviously, our argument is not that China should get rid of sovereignty. It's the way the affirmative conceptualizes the violence in the third world as a result of that. It ignores the way the United States colonialism and etc. has played a role in propping that up. They say statement of violence is key to solving things. China answered all of those arguments above. With the critique, they say the permutations efforts alternatives to reject the focus on legalistic means and fear-driven politics as a mechanism to restrain violence efforts about an issue jack. Neg links and kills clash. The plan isn't the only thing we're speaking, so it should not be the base for conversation. The permutation is incoherent. The critique necessitates you take a fundamentally different role in relation to the law than the app framework means you should reject the role of military lawyer. That the plan requires links, swamps, the perm, Sojourner 13. The solution makes decisions when the discourse framework on the Inequality series source and the British cycle insecurity. The attachment is constructed to see the heart of the radical political tension. The sees the products of the Western. The instead same time have to do the security cosmopolitan star by solve internal contradiction. Handing up a black capacity and change the rules of the reification, using government the security branch improve the Republic's regime by cities where now is a massive problem that it does not solve. The role of the balance to determine the most desirable methodology for engaging with law. The affirmative framework asks you to adopt the stance of military lawyer pointing over the legal justifications for war. While alternative and framework asks you to adopt a broader ethical stance. We restrain turn education. Therefore, considers the law and plan can be looked at in abstract. Our argument is that you can't look at the law in a vacuum because it's influenced by security constraints, which ultimately render it malleable and improves the plan focus back because it produces an advocacy to 9 single plan text. They say war is inevitable. This evidence indicates that we would have to fundamentally dismantle our notions of the human. This is the myelin mode of humanism that underlies the United States imperial drive across the world because we can define certain states as not human and therefore say that is justification for colonial violence because they don't know how to internalize liberal democracy, which result in violence equaling across the world. Also, the alternative is not some utopian vision of perfect peace to reject by IHL, etc. Our argument is that your securitized understanding of those things makes Solvency impossible. They say your roast sucks. I'll concede that. No, it's a problem. Hoon?
Yeah.
Do you have time?
I can make time.
Cool. Okay, I just need you to do one first.
Yeah, just how about
just say, they say your roast sucks.
Okay, I've got,
I think that's a lot better.
I think this might be better. 232 left.
So the 2NC had a lot of rhetoric of critical analysis. What do you tangibly do to resolve structural violence, colonialism, the underlying legacy that undergirds all violence?
Yeah, as of this debate, obviously, this we don't think the voting negative automatically erases structural violence. Our 1NC Giroux evidence is actually pretty fantastic, though. Let me just read you a line that clarifies this.
I'm not really looking for a line, more so the strategy of the alt.
Oh, the strategy of the alternative is to invigorate pedagogy as a site for political and ethical analysis to inform the way we look at policy choices being made in the real world.
So we think about shit differently. What is the end point of the politics of the alt that does something to remedy the impact?
Well, so for example, if you deconstruct the idea that hegemony is a necessarily inevitable fact of the world, we could do things like start moving away from hegemonic strategies. The alternative obviously doesn't reject policy engagement, but it says that
don't do the AF. You've not provided something descriptive that we should do instead.
Okay, the alternative is not a counterplan to do any of these things, but some examples of things that could happen. If we reframed our understanding of what violence is, we would maybe focus more on domestic violence internally. Focus on the mass amounts of prison incarceration that are equally tied to a fear of alterity. But the alt is not a CP to do those things. Our argument is that critical analysis is necessary to develop the political vocabulary is necessary if those changes are ever going to occur.
Why does the AF preclude stuff like prison reform and food stamps and all of that domestic structural violence? What is the trade-off?
There's not a direct. You don't think there's a direct trade-off between the amount of money the United States spends on its military and domestic spending?
Oh, so
your idealized version of the permutation.
Okay.
it doesn't really make sense if you
True
look at how the
violence
world
down
actually
now
works.
answers. You've read Assume Pinker's data. We've read data from a host of other people. Why do those cards apply if like our ev isn't Pinker?
Well, our evidence indicates that if you look at violence in terms of aggregate deaths, it has been increasing over the last couple decades. So even like, yes, you're right, it's indicting Pinker's methodology, but the claim underlie it's not solely an indicted Pinker. The Brown Mueller is using
Can I ask
his.
a real quick question? What is Brown Mueller 13? What is brownmueller.info? Because I got a 404 here.
This is a prof at Ohio. This is a prof of political science at Ohio State.
We don't take kindly to those.
Yeah, great.
It actually is his own person's website. Like, who the hell is reviewing?
No, but he is citing a database of data called.
All I know is like Herman is an article that's like Pinker's wrong, and then you read this card from the.
The
Brandon
correlates
Hughes
of
probably
war of militarized interstate dispute, the MID database, leads us to a similar conclusion. That's what he's
Okay, so
citing.
this MID database. Last question is there a role for experts as per your RON evidence? Do they have any role in informing policy analysis?
We think that we can develop expertise within ourselves as well. Obviously we don't reject the idea that experts know things, but our point is that we shouldn't give up politics to those experts in the face of the threat of immediate consequences.
Okay, cool. I'll use the
So,
19 seconds for prep.
Just clarify exactly.
The stuff you said, do you think these aren't just cards for, but something that is
Oh, okay.
Okay, just move your computer. I'll read it first. Yep, I'll read it first.
The card he's reading is under Tennessee Wolfworth, except brutally misspelled. Woolrarth.
I've never been able to spell that.
Okay, I'm gonna do some stuff at the bottom of the K, then go to the advantage 1 hedge, and then advantage 2 monopoly. Actually flip those. Do monopoly then hedge. Sorry.
So Monopoly then hedge?
Yeah, so K, monopoly hedge. You're welcome to move the speech doc around to make that not big. Okay. Everyone good? The Giroux evidence theory is just a polemic. It just says he doesn't have tenure, which is not an indictor. Does not mean he takes out any of our arguments about why his warranty claims are justifiable. Their last argument will be answered on the hegemony page. The public will backlash this argument they've made in the 1AC, so they cannot go back from that in. It is not my open and falsifiable for. Do you want this? Okay. The most recent scientific evidence disproves their theory about evolutionary realism. Their underlying assumption about human nature causes change in risk contending. Quite an assumption about human nature is disaster consequences. Is impossible to imagine how we resort to biases to everyone. Self-centered use of to think about self neuroorthodox human to feel on situation. Scientists are beginning to re-examine history of epithetic lens, discovering strange success evolution is measured by empathy growing. Scientific evidence may determine our fate. Revolution changes human consciousness and begin harness our empathetic intensity. We move beyond old world of geopolitics now. The monopoly advantage broad use of forms, use of force norms do not solve. McGinnis is way better than they're giving it credit for. It says limitations like the plan will never be modeled by the states that we need to actually have the model because they're the authoritarian ones who don't look to the U.S. or ever accept our norms anyway. Our evidence is just better than theirs, even if theirs is more specific for our theoretical basis for this claim because it's about the empirical examples of authoritarian states not modeling things like use of force. Democracies like Japan, which they're talking about, they mentioned the CS who already adopt those norms regardless of the plan anyway, which means that it is not necessary to solve their terminal impact and
They don't have a card that says countries are pursuing PMCs.
they also have no card that says countries are pursuing PMCs now, which means they cannot win a uniqueness argument for use of forms and use of force norms not having any impact in the short term. The SCS argument median is so much better than their evidence. Theirs is all fear-mongering. Ours is it will never escalate because of interdependence and Chinese internal reluctance from their internal politics. And their new Zenko evidence is okay because it's recent, but it says the only way to solve is clear and unambiguous understandings of the EEZs by China, which is nothing the plan can be able to solve. Proves that tensions are always inevitable, but will not ever escalate to war. It's our whole argument: no war. World War XII, SCS is unlike the Islamic country.
interest, blown the blood clots, something can wear the rest of the return, scrapping, consulting, well, same special outside, and eventually the problem, wake up, and that only society culture, great to be counteracted goals, no conflict, Sharpie 13, China, Malaysia, Vietnam, Taiwan, engaged in screaming conflict, never escalated war, do not consider benefit, justify the opposite balance of power, Chinese, Eastern, Russia, independence from June 27, to rectify the eruption, guarantee US military Chinese, this reflects strong interest in cooperation, but decided to explore common development, will continue to restrain, develop government South stability, maintain status quo, no terminal Asian war impact, which is the only way they can win escalation or terminal, thing that outweighs Bisley 310, there are good reasons that way Asian not to tumble in the war, China's, America's, trade, opportunities, you know, not to where how much they say 2 powers established, a wide range of international major to lower, misunderstanding them like the 1940 states come around, the deep interaction, nation of broad, multilateral institutions, mechanisms, protecting some varieties, focus on regional security, mechanisms being crucial in managing specific crises. Now, hegemony advantage, they've messed this plan argument up big time. Legal restraints, like the plan, are totally useless in the current Trumanite network of agency control of politics, which means that things like Madisonian checks, i.e. legislative and judicial restrictions like the plan, inevitably fail, and what we need is a total rethink of security discourse. There too, we see evidence is not responsive. Their cards are good about legalism and those restraints being sometimes good in terms of international law, but not about U.S. policy or specific enough to the topic, which is a framing issue for why Glennon is better. It's about their law reviews, i.e. the topic, affirmative, solvency, circulating the plan attempts to remedy Congress, is lack of ability to enforce restrictions by establishing more restrictions. The security bureaucracy will never be constrained by the plan for the exact same reason they're unconstrained now. Glenn 14, the difficulty with pros injections of circularity, all reply on matters on the institution to restore power to institution by accessing power, institution lack also the institution in which reform proposals originate, matching proposal forms, and network someone active member, puts problems, becomes terrible side, which is anything that negotiating financial power to humanity, ambition remains to broaden their flexibility that is imbalances to use counterterrorism policy in the interest that this Macedonian accountability of generate consent, word of consent, on necessity derived from the conversation around two nations, average Macedonian institution remains one single Trumanite network. The network is moving force behind any contested frat-waste debate. He might not have the best data, but he does use a great empirical example of the 1990s budget cuts on escalating zero chance the plan has a bigger return link to that. Their evidence that we barely use PMCs anymore proves there's no last out. Here's some other people who support Fatwise's conclusion. No longer key to peace. Hoffman 13. Conditions have changed radically since the Cold War. Japan, Germany, covering papers defending itself. China hasn't translated territorial aggressive charging the mobility, still talking about capacity, peace, congressional endurance, Truman doctrine, ability, range of research, defending research, clearly. It's not even think America is the only necessary country in national activism, modern culture, and other places step up. We try leaving a burden of security to return to normalcy. Consensus goes negative in IR. Yellow 99 polarity is little relationship to word lady. Findings continue with hot frequency and severity words unrelated to the number of major powers. Their theories backwards, empirically and theoretically. Lebo and Valentino 9 from 1640 to 1950. There's only one power transition when Russia surpassed the Spanish Empire. We had second transition when the U.S. surpassed Russia. Neither of these involved war. Marriage transitions involved the result of war, not a cause of it. Perception of changing power may be necessary, but far from decision wars, predicting power transition theories. Wars that occur result in motivation of power transitions. Hegemony cannot solve proliferation. Sikorsky 9. There's no power that can rival U.S. forces, but with nuclear states made out of the action of one state. We've got there's no attacks to the U.S. could stop the threats. There's no terminal impact of proliferation anyway. Call 13 prediction of prolonged cascades have been historically proven false. Countries without the majority of states to reverse question analysts downplay this and pluralism because cost outweigh the benefits. Mark that benefits. Montiero debate unipolarity makes major power war unavoidable. Every great grand strategy available unipolar hegemonic power sustains a high risk of clashing with major powers. The only disengagement removes those structural risks that Montiero preferred. He's a professor writing a quantitative study of every great power systems. It's the modern great system. Best data is Montiero's. Montiero 12. How well does the argument that unipolar system, peaceful counter, unipolarity, cold war, unipolarity is the most complicated of all systems according to the percentage of years. Great powers not award the instant war, great powers multiple 18% of great power wars where unipolarity, 59% is the highest rank. Multiple probabilities of all great power breakout was 4%. Unipolarity is 4 times higher. There's no evidence spread. Unipolarity is peaceful. Wolfort's wrong. Montiero 12. His article theory of unipolarity corrects the absolute scholarship requesting Wolford's English limitations. The philosophy is going beyond great power and rational analysis except for Wolford assumed that unipolar events dominance, false dominance, disengage all equal plus unipolarity, contrary to what Wolford or unipolar system provides instead for recurrent wars among major powers. Transition.
Even if war's down, Fatwise says it's not because of hedge.
Even if war's down, it's not because of hedge, which is a different causal link that Fatwise makes himself. No transition wars. McDonald's fantastic cites every empirical example of past transition not escalating. Recent trends prove goals without ownership and balance power do must become more wrong. Sorry, multiple ownership will evolve region geopolitical strategy, use power, conflict, waged by the hegemon. No lash out. Our evidence is fantastic. Here's some more comparative evidence. McDonald 11 declining. Powers have taken more. Previously constrained reinforcing all fewer disputes. But like needs 9 powers for initiate fewer disputes. Escalates lower levels. Findings suggest fundamental revision. Passive target. Fear often lash out. But finally for refrain from initiating disputes. Mark the disputes.
804. Thank you.
You say your name or not?
Yeah, my internet wasn't working, so I'll save it. Hopefully.
Alright, see if that works.
I would open up that.
Yes.
I have my
see that. It's just like,
Did you not see him speak the last time he was there?
no, because you had to like camp out and stuff.
No, yeah, I had a friend wait for me and then I cried in the line at about 6 in the morning.
Really? Yeah, even 6 a.m. is just way too much to ask.
I mean, they were there since like 2.
All right, so it's hedge, monopoly advantage, and then decay. Cool.
No, it's sorry. I just said it.
What's the case, sorry? Hedge and then the monopoly on force advantage.
Yeah, good now.
All right.
Most of the good stuff will be done in the capable, but their terms case application misunderstands the goal of the F, which is much less broader than a broader overhaul of the security state. It's just the PMC culpability is key because only something like court-martial can hold them accountable, which is key to public, which is generally on board with security, but as backlashes to incidents like the Nice Square incident, now group of the Fed Wise debate in the 90s is an AF example. We vanquished the only other bipolar rival, which obviously justified a decrease in military spending. We have to calibrate that's what the threats are, which only our evidence defines their Hoffman evidence would not have predicted stuff like Russia. It says people are proudly peaceful, which ignores the reality of great power politics. Their Lebeau evidence says the transition is insufficient to cause war. That raises the question of whether the other variables are present or Schweller. In fact, the evidence answers that. It says yes, the U.S. is particularly unique because the political dynamics will change after decline, which means none of their arguments about critical vocabulary work because we'll just become more and more uncooperative. That declines means only we solve a stable transition while the time to be grossly responsible to a great power side of the U.S. without throwing words like the maturity of American episode, listening to the church, losing Belsey question, to consider before launching eventual multiple system would collapse, multiple system would destroy care, feeding is vulnerable, other dwarf wars, the coalition would fight even, results being war, the dwarf World War II, the U.S. facing competitor, there's more powerful democracy versus liberty would be an eclipse. It's viable to ensure transition multiple occurs and gentlemen of Washington can minimize the probability of great power war. They also consider the other dyads warrant their the historical examples don't assume that broad U.S. alliance network that are otherwise historical rivals countries like Japan and South Korea, etc. will fight each other without the U.S. security blanket. The Monte Euro evidence, our Busby evidence is way better. The big problem with Monte Euro is that the only variable he uses in his data set is whether or not we are at war. So right now, today is the statistical equivalent of Normandy to him. Our Busby evidence says that Germany's way more peaceful and solves that better. Now the monopoly advantage, we're not going for it. All of the warrants that they would apply are that access by hegemony because it's a prerequisite to stuff like the commercial peace and interdependence because only the U.S. provides those global public goods. It's not the type of stuff that the Freedom Evidence is describing. It's more about U.S. security networks and alliances, which only hard power and the commitment to it solves, especially in the conflict of future hotspots. Now the critique debate at the top of the impact union is their Baumiller evidence is writing on his own website proves that if he's a poli-sci professor, he should have gotten it published somewhere. Absolute level. It's a stupid measure because of population growth, but it proves that hegemony solves better because it only emerged after the Cold War, so past centuries don't really apply. Dresner says that it's a prerequisite to stuff like public goods because nobody else has the collective action and ability to provide the resources for stuff like keeping sea lanes open. The Herman Indicts assume Pinker, which doesn't apply consensus. It goes AFCAT 13 and and number of scholars have been a very similar conclusion on an issue of cardinal significance. That thesis deserves attention. The thesis were about time decrease throughout history. We live in the most peaceful period in history. Relative casualties decrease that occurrence of overall morality decrease sharply after 815. Decrease in worse capitalist democracies and not democracies. Also, there warrant that other stuff could be causing it. Is just purely extrapolation on Fed Wise, which we have a fantastic indictment to data on levels of violence and integration. Go after all of their Pinker indicts to just apply to his normative stance on stuff like the Enlightenment trends are unequivocal, even for invisible violence. Jervis 11. Many scholars deny the good news after conquering the Greeks killed all the men and women and the children and put them into slavery to make far-reaching claims. One must draw on equally vast resources, and so bigger does has he understood all this material with the typicals inside distrust of interlopers. I was ready to catch him second the deck. The record on interstate conflicts muddier because definitions, various theories are incomplete. Most studies have revealed decline contrary to expectations that has decided shifting violence is bullshit. Ross said it all six the new cow data in accord with conflict modern projects find and decreased authors make the case that war is shifting from imperial wars while the global violence remains constant. We challenge that by questioning their own data. We then discuss problems in the deaths data. We find battle decline after World War II again, and then after the Cold War. That frames your broader impact perception. Things means time frame outweighs because only that can disrupt the broader trend towards it. Also turns the ability for the alternative itself because that critical vocabulary won't do shit if we're busy fighting wars. Now the risk to make group with their Glennon evidence is from a paranoid conspiracy theory hack. For instance, if there's this broad pervasive secret government, then how the hell does he know it even exists? Our Ravenel evidence is that our authors are sufficiently qualified. They can't just make stuff up because they would get fact checked and fired for the broader impact. Their impact gets the less they solve it. But the translation magnifies all those problems. As per Schweller evidence and McClintock evidence that raises the question of whether all leaders would embrace that type of alternative. Or Brooks evidence turns it because the war enemies are worthless. Stuff that happens in war crimes and rape and stuff are horrible, but they're not unique to the U.S. We also turn that dialogue, because Brooks says that it's actually a critique of realism and says that stuff like status theory is more important because states consider a non-material cost, which only U.S. can solve by preventing any sort of competition by being so far ahead. Even if other turns are true, it's only a question of military effectiveness are more evidence. It's a fantastic insight of the art, because just because they use words like critical vocabulary and other issues doesn't mean they actually get those things done, because they don't have the resources or collective action to mobilize them. I think he said something about Somalia, which is a pretty good example of the fact that they think that's a paragon of stability is pretty dubious. The obfuscate those things being effective. The alternative debate group is Jerosi, utopian hippie with no academic credibility outside of the lefty K-debate insular circle. We read evidence from his own website talking about how nobody wants to give him tenure because he makes shit up. What is the vocabulary analysis they seriously provide you? Seriously, if they haven't given you in this debate, what makes you think that voting for them will do it? Our Beckley evidence says that worse, the best thing they can give is just a transition away from hegemony, because people would, because their alternative would get people to do stuff like defund the military. Our Elstein evidence is the best card in the debate. It says that all these things sound good in critical theory, but they don't actually have a mechanism to actualize them. So the only thing we can do in the meantime is wash our asses and block out, look out for security threats. Their Rana evidence is wrong. Cole 12. It seems far from clear that there was ever an era in which decisions were made by the people and increased scientific solutions that problems may be contributing factor or glance and expert. I doubt that security matters were ever truly a matter of democratic deliberation, to the extent that there has been an epistemological shift. Seems like the response to rejective gauge is not an ideological development. It's not clear that we can solve the problem merely by thinking differently about security. The world has become more interconnected and dangerous. That knowledge necessary to respond to threats is increasingly specialist problem. It's not just how we think security, but also how it is objectively best we solve all of those things. Their Rifkin evidence is based on the Huffington Post. Hegemony is a prerequisite to that. It's not based on offensive realism for reasons that described above. And our speech act doesn't make it any worse, because Guggen's really says that one speech act doesn't obviously solve the securitization stuff. We solve all their bogus turns case warrants because we make the PMCs part of the military. So if they do something like rape or invade a village, they would be court-martialed. Even if the military is not perfect, it's better than having them outside that status, which the alternative doesn't do. The 1AC cards are really good on how, even if you think PMCs are bad, the least worst thing that we can do is bring them under the military chain of command. The permutation debate there now. The permutation proves that they are the ones offering a false choice. We'll defend our revs, but they have no reason why the plan can't be a part of the alternative. The alternative swamps the links just as much as the links swamp the permutation. If they actually have a political mechanism, or they don't solve anything, their role about is entirely self-serving. They have to have the burden of majority to prove the plan is a bad idea. Otherwise, they haven't met the role of the negative, and they would be setting up a standard of epistemic perfection where they just point out one bad assumption and they win no matter what proves. You can't look at the alternative in a vacuum. Also, their claims about the military-industrial complex are wrong. You should endorse it. Dunlap 11, the 15, the MIC Impact 2 is military capability, and Howard says long ago, don't learn, and knowledgeable citizens will compel the substance show the appropriate level of maturity. It says, meant to maintain the Mark, ignore the fact. Mark, ignore the fact.
232.
All right, then we're good?
Hang on, let's do that one. Got it.
Cool.
The World Anti-Matter Debate Group had won. It's not because of hegemony or fat waste evidence. Fantastic indicates that the global norm for developing toward peace. Their 2AC card is awful. It doesn't answer our argument. It just has fat waste highlighted Georgetown style with absolutely no warrants. If there is a discernible warrant, it just says that there's a world where states might get nuclear weapons. Hegemony is not able to solve that. If anything, this type of WB threat discourse empirically led to the invasion of Iraq. They do not have a scenario for what state is going to acquire nuclear weapons. They've conceded all of the analysis done by the Montiero evidence indicates that hegemony actually makes world affairs more likely because in response to the overwhelming dominance of the United States proved by their status-seeking argument, countries feel their only recourse is to get nuclear weapons. Their status-seeking argument assumes that the rest of the world will simply lie down under the boot of the United States and are evidence again. That's not how it goes down. To the U.S. folks on the enabling conditions for violence or Brown Mueller evidence fantastic. He is citing comprehensive data set. He's pressure political science just because he's writing. He's citing a broader set of data. He says that we've been on the brink of extinction and nuclear extinction multiple times. You should not rely on the law that the affirmative data does harm to the folks on the structural forces of violence that have led to an increase in aggregate deaths globally. Or to Herman evidence. Who cares if it's about Pinker? The fundamental argument is that the military industrial complex holds such sway over the United States foreign policy that it makes the by threat inflation that makes we have a permanent investment in a war system that makes ultimately the escalation for their shares inevitable. Escalation for their shares inevitable. They say third argument is great power wars. Here's ongoing violence or that focus on the great peace between favorite powers. Ignores United States invasions like Lebanon, Grenada, etc. The fact that we killed 16 civilians in Yemen earlier this year, and you know what? Those people do not give a shit about whether or not the PMCs are under a code of conduct which proves that they're focused on the issue of juridical discourse that ignores the broader ethical questions that are raised by the negative or freedom of answers to public good argument and indicates that this is a paternalistic understanding of international relations that presumes other countries won't be able to realize that war is not in their self-interest, which shows with the fat waste argument proves there's no reason the United States is better necessary to fight the public good, especially since, for example, the ties between South Korea and Japan have been massively increasing recently. There's no reason they would just randomly start asserting the conflict of the world. The plan they conceded to couple pieces of proliferation defense of the case, which made it impossible for them to win their Brooks evidence because that is the only impact in the Brooks evidence they've conceded card that if proliferation occurs, it'll be slow and will not actually trigger conflicts empirically proven by the lack of aggressive action by Iran and North Korea, and the status quo in our evidence indicates that the United States Germany is actually not able to solve the proliferation of anything. It encourages because massive conventional superiority. You should not allow the two-area answer because it was fundamentally dropped from the 1 year. Now they say the time frame should not wait. I'll do the alternative debate here. You should reject the forceful choice of immediate consequences possible on the affirmative view. You should get the plan, but our affirmative argument is this question how you relate to it. The 1 year is insufficient on the framework question. It's not. Which means you should defer the question of the yes/no policy analysis for a broader ethical reframing of the question of this debate is how you relate to the plan, how you relate to the methodological systems of understanding international relations to which it contributes. Our job evidence indicates that wars fundamentally war fundamentally occurs because local discourses permeated in sites like academic spaces like debate, and that is intimately connected to the ongoing balance of war, terror, and fear of alternative which alternative is able to resolve. Our GRO evidence indicates that pedagogy is a necessary prerequisite to developing any of these political movements, which is claiming the cross-examination of the 2 and critical vocabulary allows us to deconstruct the inevitability of things like hegemony, which means the alternative is able to solve the case. Rada evidence indicates ultimately that they mistake the question of politics for one of law, which means a focus on the political assumption to go into the threat discourse of the 1AC means that the alternative is able to solve the root cause of the case. They conceded. I read the line from their Stanger and Williams evidence that says that we need to conserve democratic accountability and transparency at home in order to maintain the legitimacy globally, which proves that the alternative fundamentally is able to solve the legitimacy better because it relies on a different understanding of power that says maybe we will be the most powerful when we can all reach a world in which violence has mostly been abolished by denied by in which violence has been severely restrained. They say that Leonard is wrong. Their evidence is so much better than theirs. Has no way to explain. They've conceded the argument that their evidence is all circular because it relies on the Madisonian institutions which are failing to restrain the Truman Network and the South Dakota to do the same. For example, the military just will not try these people in military tribunals. Yes, for extremely heinous things that does happen, but when there was somebody raped on a military base in Okinawa in '95, you did not see a military tribunal. And the United States will use the plan as a justification for shielding our PMCs from prosecution of the ICJ, which is the one to see Mauricio evidence at least status here. Rifkin evidence says that this understanding of evolutionary biology upon which their wolf of evidence relies because it says that people will inevitably seek status vis-a-vis each other precludes an empathetic understanding of how international relations can operate. Our evidence indicates that this directly contributes to environmental destruction because it relies on an atomistic understanding of subjectivity and agency, atomistic understanding of subjectivity and agency, which are alternative fundamentally rejections and recognized in favor of interconnection, which means that not only their argument scientifically bankrupt and breaks down the possibility for a global move towards peace. They read this more evidence. Obviously, we do not think the alternative of you push a button against rid of structural violence. It requires a slow transformation, but that raises the question whether or not you should adopt the position of problem solving and critical versus critical theory in this span. When we have a better way to understand the question of war powers then and why that executive overreach happens and why we are unlikely to send people to military tribunals, then you should defer questions of immediate action. They say Somalia is not great in the status quo. They conceded the argument that it's about some Somaliland developed independently and they conceded sovereignty like independently, there will be a proliferation of the conflicts imposed and caused by liberal state bill, which United States Germany props up that ultimately caused that they instantly mature the case and access to the order to see back. This is Rosex. This evidence just says like his person didn't want to give him tenure because he didn't use logic. Like seriously, this card says fundamentally nothing. Our evidence indicates that pedagogy is a prerequisite to any radical revolutionary policy because it is the only site of truly political thought left. They say the alternative is not able to. If we cut the military, that would cause backlash, and then they say Elshine, we can't do anything. Within the same breath, he posited an alternative, i.e., that we could cut military spending, and then says there are no alternative. This is the blackmail of hegemony you fundamentally have to reject. They've conceded it's based on a social system. Their evidence replaces physical facts with social ones, and the alternative is able to break down that ideology. Or McClintock evidence on one indicates hegemony is constituted from within via discourses of enemies that constitute ourselves as the exceptional nation that needs to protect the earth, and public rejection of the discourse is necessarily be able to solve. They say that Rifkin is a prerequisite. That I would answer these arguments, but they say we make PMCs part of the military. You should reject this blackmail that we're going to do really, really messed up stuff. No matter what, it's only a question of whether we can make it a little better. That is the conservative choice that our critique says you need to reject in favor of a broader ethical analysis to notice how war permeates and ultimately results in their impact. Hegemony. What? Oh, the permutations of the rhetoric of one is they have no explanation for it. It's also any of our link arguments or social evidence indicate that the links swamp the alternative because it's more the links swamp the permutation. It clouds the critical thought that our alternative evidence indicates leads to action. Now, the case I mostly extended the hegemony defense on the other page, but they conceded the McDonald empirical evidence is fantastic. Indicates there's no chance of lash out. There's no chance of lash out in fact of an empirical study, and they made an argument that the public will draw down from hegemony, which means they can't go for these arguments because the public influences it, which is our alt.
450? 401. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I just flipped it over. That was mine first. Oop.
Hegemony, the K. Is everyone good to go? The question isn't yes, no hegemony, it's whether a status quo is better than a violent transition away from hegemony, which is something the alternative precipitates and caused overall violence, that the alternative necessarily caused a transition away from that. The fact the evidence indicates decline some compromise, trade commons, overreaction, and decrease the overall effectiveness of the global commons, cause disease, warming, and the escalation of every possible transnational challenge ensures that regional dyads escalate, which is a scenario independent from prolif and the rest of the hegemony defense, which is an independent distance to the alternative. The fact the evidence indicates that results in overall nuclear use. 2 is there's no answer to the 1 here Walton card. They should have read that card in the 2 and R says the rise of the rest is inevitable. The alternative is regional balances of power, which cause widespread uncertainty and cause miscalculation and escalation. You should prefer impacts versus scope only. We access great power. Nuclear use life is the condition of resistance to other forms of injustice. The premise of the argument that violence is bad, but we access not more violence. Nuclear use shatters traditional impact calculus and causes an uptake in injustice, causes and exacerbates suffering. Second is the fulcrum of offense. The alternative must collapse U.S. leadership to resolve the links. Their framework relies upon reifying hegemony being bad, and every impact presumes the causality of our impact to be false. The McDonald evidence merely does not cut it because it does not assume a violent transition away from hegemony that would occur in the short term, and how other nations would react to that. The internal link to the case is not premised on the public. Their only evidence of this is Friedman, which is not applied to the one of these internal link, which is about overall military effectiveness. PMC's dilute that because of the unclear authority over the chain of command, which congressional authorization is critical to solve. It signals overall support. The alternative has no mechanism for eliminating PMS. Public checks do not apply because the point is that PMS are outside of public scrutiny, and the status quo of the planet is a prerequisite to making those political checks effective. That was the piece of Huck evidence we have read. Our internal link is not about legitimacy. It is about the effectiveness of our military operations and how that dampens the overall propensity for global violence. Now the K proper, the violence debate is a crush on this question. The Dresner evidence cites the consensus of experts on this question. It says because of U.S. hegemony, it cites 2013 data, which they have no answer to. Their evidence is based on history. We have said that 2013 is the most peaceful era in human existence. It cites the conflict example, and then the Philippines and the Congo, which only Dresner assumes. The other piece of Dresner evidence cites aggregate data and contest the vast majority of their evidence. The first piece of evidence they have read is by Fetways. We have an awesome insight of Fetways. The B evidence says his methodology is suspect and overall risk of violent escalation in the short term. Also, the argument about the 90s peace dividend that justified a decrease in military spending, but our evidence says the threats are uniquely likely in the status quo. The Iraq argument got to crack a few eggs break an omelet to make an omelet. Our impact is bigger. Montero does not say it results in prolif. The Woolforth answer is an on-point answer to Montero and says that the world is getting net better, and the status quo does not result in prolif because our evidence is a differential in scope. A declining hegemony causes net more prolif because of the rising security dilemma. Our evidence is merely about regional dialogues. The Bohmiller evidence is about one data source, which you should prefer consensus. They have dropped the GAD evidence, which has the consensus data proves violence is getting better on the status quo. There's no violence shifting thesis, which our evidence explicitly answers. You should default to consensus on this question. Is the only way to determine causal and internal link change. The alternative is deference to a single author. They've also dropped the Pinker Pro Day, which has violence is getting better on the status quo. This proves the alternative forfeits this, and a transition from hegemony necessarily would be violent, and it would decrease the overall benefits of this. Only hegemony results in an open international system, which is necessary to solve these arguments. The Herman evidence about the military-industrial complex, they have dropped the Ravenel evidence, which indicates our authors would get fired, and they have not proven that every instance of hegemony necessarily is this. We are based on robust social science data. The examples of Lebanon and Grenada presumes those interventions are bad. You should not necessarily do that. Their argument about subaltern perspectives assumes that the subaltern perspectives are a monolith, and if we win that hegemony is net better for everyone and proves that characterization is wrong. They say there's no war that doesn't assume decline and a transition away from U.S. hegemony, which fundamentally changes the dynamic and cause overall war. The pro-love stuff, even if there's not an impact to it, it changes regional dyads, which is an impact we have something external to it. It's also based on the declining trade and the prompt lash out of the United States, which the United States would preemptively use nuclear weapons, which the one E.C. Beckley evidence is fantastic on. The alternative just has to cause a ethical reorientation, but if the end point of their politics is merely an ethical reorientation, what the hell does that do? That is a sham politics that does nothing meaningful for the global international system and is not capable of solving. The Elstein evidence is the best card in the debate and says that their alternative is the equivalent to singing Kumbaya, let's end the military, let's reprogram that funding, but they have no tangible mechanism to do that, given that the alternative is not a counterplan to Fiat to do that. The reinvigoration of this space in no way does that. It just merely gets co-opted. The Elstein evidence indicates limits on the use of force are the most pragmatic way to do that. The Giroux evidence is just based on a deconstruction. What does that deconstruction do? The Rana evidence, they have dropped the 1 hour coal card, which is an answer to their public checks argument. It says a reference to expertise in this particular instance has proven that Rana's methodology is too sweeping, which proves that they eviscerate legal solutions which are necessary to solve the Sanger evidence about the war at home. Presumes our internal link is about legitimacy and democratic accountability. Hell, it's about the effectiveness of the military military and how that opposes deterrence via punishing cost and why I decline from that is bad. Blended evidence doesn't answer Casopolis, which has the law can be used for strategic effects, which is net more effective. They also have dropped that you cannot falsify the existence of this particular military industrial complex. The plan solves it. There's one example of the rules of engagement being bad, but that is net better than the status quo, which causes divisions over line of authority, collapses mission effectiveness, and causing overall transition away from U.S. power. The Rifkian evidence presumes we are defending an offensive form of realism, which is not what we are. Not what we are doing. The Woolforth evidence actually is the critique of that form of realism and says that there are not shiesty motives. Hegemony solves that because there's competing interests, and the only way to reconcile inevitable competing interests in the international sphere is to have hegemony. The empathy does not result in environmental destruction. Hell, try or die is not a negative. They've not one read a piece of an impact card to the environment, nor a claim why the alternative uniquely solves that, or a link to the plan, which all of our more no root cause stuff applies to. More says there's no catch-all solution to structural violence, which is the alternative, and proves their alternative is a form of sham politics that's not capable of solving, is not sufficient to cause overall global warfare, which proves we turn the case, but not vice versa. They have conceded that war turns structural violence. It caused an uptick in overall violence. The sovereignty link was a mere blip. The alternative does not reorient sovereignty. Instability does not turn the case. This presumes our argument is about legitimacy and norms, which we have conceded that argument. The false choice they have presented with the alternative presumes that the question is between the plan and the alternative, which is a net better strategy. If a status quo is improving as per the preponderance of the evidence, but a transition away from hegemony causes net more violence than the current system. Even if hegemony isn't ideal, it's what we have.
Can I get versions of the speech doctor cards that
Yep.
were read?
Yeah.
Yes, for all of them until I asked, which was.
Do you have all my stuff copies?
Let me make sure.
Okay.
Where are you headed?
Just to wander around a bit. What was that going on? I've got my phone if you have any clarification.
Yes.
You need to grab it.
No.
Yeah.
I'll source it. It'll be up for only 20 minutes.
I definitely am. I don't know. Paul is.
Yeah.
Cool. I spelled the two wrong.
I didn't see it scroll down.
Oh, I'm sorry, actually, don't look on that version. I didn't include something. Yeah, that's the term.
I just sent all the as well.
We also need.
Oh, the speech, yeah. My screen just. I didn't.
I wish Rio. It's actually nice.
Yeah, I didn't screen. It's this one. You know what?
Yeah. Oh, okay, so the thing is like yours. Yeah, that's like.
Okay. We stuck bags over cops' asses and collected them that night.
Sounds deep.
They went for it.
Would y'all mind organizing it by like arguments that they're relevant to rather than the speeches that be?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did that. How would you like me to?
I was just
Okay,
looking
yeah.
at Miles' file.
Okay.
Mine is like 1 in CK, 2 in CK, 1 in CK, 2 in CK.
Yeah,
Just make it by arguments.
yeah.
Each section.
Like, if you could group them to the places where you think they're relevant, rather than just like making me look through everything.
Yeah. Like, do you want me to sectionalize the 1 in C?
If you could like combine, rather than like 1 in C, 2 in C, if you could like put things together, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Paul, would you like me to change anything or no?
I think you're good for now.
Okay.
This is much better.
Now just imagine how my files work.
Is there any power anywhere near here I've got 48 minutes on my clock.
Yeah, did you read it? Or did you end up reading it?
Yeah, good thing we timed it. No, they were close. Oh, did we end up reading it this round? No.
Go ask.
What?
Go ask.
Oh, I should write five of that all the time. It's kind of unfortunate.
Quite literally, right?
I thought about it.
Nobody thought it was rolling there. Like, this people, like, they were like, yeah, this. They were like, just like,
When does it?
and so I was just like, I'm sorry that we know. And it,
What's your record right now?
we are, we're in 5 rounds, right? We're 3-2 with.
What's your debating? Do you know now or right now?
Security thing. With some things that seemed kind of complexity-ish, but then complexity-ish stuff got lost.
Apology here,
We just read your action. We were like, yeah. Just 'cause, like, What's that? But we'll see.
oh, no, no, just closing it.
Yeah.
a space that's supposed to be there? You know, like a PDF copier?
How do you PDF turn the BES I just love it.
It's like the German word for.
Maybe I said all a more consolidated document like that, or is the organization fine?
Oh, I don't care. leftover sushi for your wish.
Okay, my mother.
Just ownership.
Okay, wait, they get better. So here's my mom. And then the next one. Oh, that one's so much better.
Oh!
Okay, that's the cutest thing
I
ever.
feel like now that I've met both your mom and your dad, I finally understand you.
Wait, let me see.
Of my mom or my, I guess I can only.
Whatever
say
yours
mom.
is.
Happens dad.
Just the Brooks and Woolworth card has like an internal words now. It's bad thing.
Yo, but yeah, I've met Pappas' dad.
He's been here for a while.
This guy.
I got Miles.
Is that your mom?
Yeah.
Is she a big machine fan now?
I mean, in the sense that I go to Michigan and she's my mother, but external to that, no.
Dude, I literally don't think my parents would know that what Wildcats are.
What about Ray wouldn't?
Ray would just be like, it's not my job.
I think me and Ray would get along famously.
Dude, my friends love Ray more than I do.
Porcelain, I believe this is in the map.
Yeah, that thing was kind of passive aggressive.
It is certainly not a new app.
What happened?
It's like the preemption targeted killing app that you all read at Dartmouth.
Who read it?
It looks like your cards actually. Yeah, well,
Wait, who read it?
Forsland was just like, someone's breaking a new app, here it is.
That's the same thing, that's just verbatim. So, they say that we read it dark.
Your formatting is so distinct, but just like, I guess so is word count, you just point to it and be like,
Oh no, dude, that is one of ours.
Oh, I use all of them.
Portland judging are one of ours.
oh, okay.
Who's judging class? Who's why it is.
Well, he thinks it's a new app.
No, he like he's like still working, but he like accepted an offer for like when his like I guess contract goes up, and he's going to like some place called Apollo that just like buys companies that are doing bad and makes them awesome and sells it. So he just gets to like buy huge shit and fix it.
Oh my god. Jay should convince me to sell my company like this.
Yeah. For free.
Did you see he got like a Facebook world with all his mess up and everything? He like had some really long response and just got me to S2A, yay.
Awesome.
Is Morrissey the juridical discourse card?
Yeah, it's yellow.
That thing is still recording, because I just got a G-chat that's like, don't make fun of Forsland. Ryan Keenan.
We turn it off.
Yeah.
You turn the camera off.
Do you want me to?
Do you know how to?
Yeah,
So
you can.
reason the post strategy speed is or just where it exists.
I mean, can you turn it off until the judges?
Yeah.
Comes in? That'd be awesome.
Is
sorry if I had the comment on that. Okay, congratulations to both teams. The winner on a 2-1 decision is the negative.
I sat, I voted on a list of transition wars, and the fact that we're getting better now outweighs a good link to the nebulous impact of the environment. I'll be honest, I think a lot of my decision is going to emphasize the execution of the transition wars to date. I had the 2 arguing over very little time, extending the evidence rapidly, and only making the argument that there would not be a transition war, where I had the 2AR very well explaining exactly evidence and very well explaining the war evidence. I'm concerned about a multipolar balance of power occurring in a world absent hegemony. I'm concerned that risk will go nuclear, and they also give a provide of their Beckley evidence that's newer and specific to the current situation, and because you don't get here with much time to defend your evidence, I don't have you answering those specific limits for the Beckley evidence. With regard to whether or not the world is getting better or worse now, I think the combination of the Dresner evidence and the Jervis evidence convinces me that overall things are getting better because of structural factors like democracy and interdependence, which would go out the window if we didn't have a hegemonic world in the future. And I think they have prodied of the Pinker evidence that they thought he was stacking the deck but was not. Now, some things that do give me some pause about that. I think your Bromweiler evidence is very good, that this could be by chance. But I think that the explanation that it's because of other structural factors like democracy and interdependence is better. Your Herman evidence talks about there could be some wars against the third world, but the Dresner 13 evidence says on every indicator, infant mortality, structural violence, etc., we're getting better than we were before. With regard to the framework debate and the ethics debate, I think the terminal impact of the framework debate is what system do we ultimately want. You and the 2NR frame your alternative as being a move towards defense cuts, similar to what happened with the Fetweiss evidence. And I think it's what system do we want? Do we want a retrenchment from hegemony, or do we want a continuation of hegemony? And I think it's better to stick with the flawed system of the continuation of hegemony. With regard to your ethics arguments, I think it depends on what is net better for the subaltern. I think things that are better for the subaltern are things that help overall. The part of the debate that gave me the most trouble, and maybe the reason why I split with the other judges, is the Rifkin debate, the empathic understanding debate. I think that you have a pretty good link to this argument, being that they're defending a system of hegemony and defending that, you know, sometimes we need to break a few eggs to make an omelet, as they say. But I don't really know what the impact of the environment is in this debate. I mean, this evidence is hyperbolic at best. That is an argument that they make. And I also think that there's a little bit of a false choice between the plan and the alternative, and I think the world is getting better right now. I think if you had gotten to the transition war debate with more time and defended your evidence better, I think I would have voted negative. But I think I have the 2NR getting here with about 10 seconds. The affirmative defends their evidence against your claims, and even if I were to look at the evidence as an objective observer and say, I think